Hey, it's Crumbs. You're lost? How do you not know where you are? It's Thorin's channel.
Right, this is going to be the second episode of Rotations, which is my new show. And as promised, I have different co-hosts. Not on every episode, obviously, otherwise not least, because what the point of being a co-host, then it was just be a guest. But I have different co-hosts depending on the region, depending on the sort of topics. And so you never saw this coming, old school Summoning Insight fans. One of my co-hosts is TSM and Misfits. Actually, he's obviously not TSM anymore. He's Misfits now. But no one would ever have seen that coming amazing at the end of 2014, mate. That's a pairing. You don't see that iconic duo being put together, right?
Nope. Those were good times, though. Those were good times. I missed the banter.
Oh, the sad thing people don't realise is, this is actually probably a very relevant thing to say in this moment, right? Is because in the moment, listen, banter can sting, or you can take it personally, or whatever. Everyone does it. I do it myself, obviously, when TSM fucks with me now. But what I would say is this, is it's something I noticed when I do those reflections with like retired players, especially if they were retired like 5 years ago. Like if I do like a CS player like from 10 years ago, dude, they never have like bitterness and resentment, because what happens now is all the minor petty stuff fades away. And in fact, even like the banter and the stupid like rivalries and back of that, they like, it becomes nostalgic. Like they start looking back, like those were good times actually. Like it was kind of cool when I was going back and forth. I'm sure in your era, like going back and forth with CLG when they all thought they were better than you. Thought they were, of course, it's brilliant now, isn't it? Like I bet you'd have a brilliant beer if you just sat down with one of them now.
I mean, I definitely had those talks. Like, it's so fucking fun. Like, it's just, there's so many stories you can tell about that. Like, especially with the CLG days, and like back in the days, like League of Legends, especially, like there was so much more controversy. There was so much more going on that, like,
dude, back then you used to be allowed to post tweets to the subreddit. Like, if anyone's a modern day fan, listen, you can get some of your drama, but can you even imagine if like Thorin tweets, Amazing Tweet, Pro Player tweets, Reggie tweets were going on Reddit with their own threads where people dived in? Like, it used to be wild back in those years.
Yeah, I had my share of threads.
Of course. Mate, I'm sure you'd be on there again in the modern day if they allowed tweets in the same way. You've done a few. A few.
Yep. I have. I mean, I got pretty close recently, so I think,
true. You came close to the line, but you just pulled back at the last second before it was too late. You had to peer over the edge of the cliff. Right, here's the thing. For this particular episode, right, people are probably wondering, what is the topic for this one? Now, here's where it's going to actually show people basically the concept that I had for the show and the mobility that the show can have, which is unlike my other shows where a lot of them tend to be, like, obviously, when I did Elitist United, it was LEC. That was just what it is. Or EU Masters if there was nothing going on in LEC. If I did shows in the past, I did a show with Emily Rand, that was the LCK or whatever. The first episode of this show was the LCK because Ashley Kang obviously is embedded there. That's her world. The concept for this one is, listen, in the future, me and Amazing we might do, if there's a really interesting week or set of rivalries, maybe we will do an LEC show or we'll do topics around that. But for this one, actually, we're going to do something that, like, if you like, put it this way, if you like basketball or you recently watched the really good, it's actually on Netflix in Europe, documentary, The Last Dance, this is going to be a really unique, but I hope really fun episode, actually, because what we're going to do is, Amazing as you saw when he came on was it the Crackdown that we did that discussion on? I think it was, right?
Yeah, with Dom.
Yeah, when we did the Crackdown, like, the problem with that one is, Amazing did say before, like, he wanted to do that topic, but Dom just forgot, and he always asks that question at the very end, so we only did sort of like 15 minutes on The Last Dance, whereas, like, if you actually know Amazing, he would have just done the whole show on that and then done 15 minutes about, like, LEC or whatever, you know. So basically, we're going to do that episode. So what we've done is, listen, we obviously all watched The Last Dance. I've only watched it once already. And we had a couple of sort of, like, guidelines coming into the episode, which is, first of all, we're going to talk about some of the interesting things about the documentary for themselves, like what they were, what the players were like, etc. But then, as with everything nowadays, you can relate it all to esports and how coaching's done and how you set up a team. There's a million angles you can go with this, so we'll see where we go. And then we're also going to try, just as a fun little exercise, to see which League of Legends pros would be like some of the figures in The Last Dance, like who would be the Michael Jordan of this show, whatever. So there's a lot we can do here, Amazing. So I'll just start at the top. When you watch The Last Dance, obviously it's fun just to watch, like, just as a documentary. Like, it's one of those ones I actually recommend to some people who don't even like basketball. I'm like, actually, don't worry about it. There's not even that much basketball in it. Like, most of it isn't the game. It's like the people, the story, you know, and crucially, you get all that, like, behind the scenes juice. But what were the, like, big themes coming into this and then watching it that maybe were things that you knew but were interesting or something you didn't know? Like, what's an angle we can start with here?
I mean, I think the most dominant angle was probably just like the way that Michael Jordan operated as a person, but I think
Yes.
more so how the Bulls operated as a team, and it was really really interesting to see how like dysfunctional the overall like team obviously was. We knew some things beforehand from Jerry Reinsdorf and like Jerry Krause, but in the end, like how dysfunctional the front office was compared to the actual team and how functional they were, despite all the ongoing drama, all the ongoing like issues, then even like the differences between Michael Jordan, like there's Rodman, like having like some kind of like I guess like I mean in general they all had just like different personalities that didn't really fit like they didn't fit together, but somehow they made it fit, and that was the
Yes.
most incredible thing to just see the locker room presence of everyone like carrying their own weight and actually like influencing the team positively. So, and how Phil Jackson honestly was handling it, because I think
Guy's
that's like at
genius,
least
isn't he?
for a coach like me, like where at this point I'm still trying to figure things out, and he just knew what to do, and that
Sure.
was mind-boggling thing to see to me.
Well, as I say, we'll definitely get to Phil Jackson. Put it this way, he's second on my list of the personalities. Obviously, Michael Jordan's first, but I knew with the coaching, we thought we could do that. But actually, one thing I'll say at the beginning, and I'm sure you can talk to this as a pro player, is this is actually something in The Last Dance that's a lot of people, by the way, are going to have your initial reaction. They're going to be like, what the hell? How did a team that won like 3 titles in a row? And obviously, like the first 2 seasons of those, they were super dominant. If people don't know, yeah, the first season they broke the record. They did 72 games. A lot of people don't know the next season they won like 69 games. Like that team was absurd. Like they were losing barely any games. So what I would say is this. When you see a team like that and you think, how could they have so much disarray? Same as when like the Shaq Kobe Lakers won. People are like, how is it possible? How could they be at each other's throats but win? I'll tell everyone a little secret if you've never been a pro player, because obviously I've known a lot of pro players over my time. The teams that you don't think are like that, they just have something internally where they agree not to let it get out. All locker rooms, in some senses, have some level of dysfunction. Like, I'll give you an example to lead in and set you up to talk about some of the teams you were on. People will think when they heard the last episode that we're referring to, or they heard the Elites United episodes, that when you talk about your time on OG, that's the team you talk about most nostalgically, right? It was a team where you had like a relationship with everyone, you had all the, but if people actually listen to what you're saying, your almost like ideal team was where you had all these like totally different personalities and even like people who would just directly go at each other about stuff. But that's the point. You came to some sort of agreement, or you had like a something held you together, right? You could be dysfunctional, but at the same time, it could work.
Yeah. So, I mean, we always had mutual agreement. And I think that's like the difference between like winning and losing teams in general, that everyone comes in with a mutual agreement. Hey, this is what we do. We all have our different personalities. We all want to do what we want to do, but we want to come together every single practice and give our best. We want to make sure that we bring the team forward. And I think in terms of OG, for example, to just give that example and to talk about it, like when we came together as a team, Mithy and Sven weren't friends. Like me and I didn't even know anybody because I was only in the EU for half a year and then I left to TSM. So I didn't have personal relationships with Pecky. I didn't have personal relationships with Soas. And my personality, especially like driven after the Reggie whole stint, like of like being influenced by him for half a year, made me quite the aggressive person by comparison. So when Mithy was an aggressive person, I was an aggressive person. Soas was like had his moments. Pekka was more in the background, and Sven like was an upcoming rookie who basically had to show that he wanted to be part of the LEC or LCS at that time, and he actually had to like kind of fend off for himself. So we had so many issues to begin with, and there were so many things that were just like people screaming at one another, shouting at one another in practice, like, you're doing this wrong, why are you doing this wrong, you should know better. And all these things like still like didn't influence us negatively at all. It actually made us stronger because we knew that all of us cared at the same time. So that almost like mutual, like, I mean, driving forward, the aggression, the discussions assured one another that we're all in the same boat, we're all caring, we all want to win. And I think especially like nowadays that has kind of been eliminated, but back in the days that was basically like a normality amongst the teams that were at the top.
You had to figure it out yourselves, right? There wasn't some like structure where they were like, and now you sit there and you sit there and let's be polite, like you're not like little kids. Yeah, like you say, I mean that was a team of veterans and Niels basically, Sven now. So you guys just figured it out yourselves, right? You men.
Yeah, we didn't. I mean, at the time, we didn't even have a coach to begin with. So we basically in Tenerife, we're playing on the 80 ping. We're amongst ourselves. We only had our manager there, who was basically just like more or less like our house mom, I guess. You know, who's doing everything for us, making sure that we're eating and we're having like toilet paper in the house, I guess. But like all of the organizatorial things, all the all just like the gameplay things and the after game discussions, even like the between like interpersonal relationships, were all based upon the fact that we wanted to have them come in, and it wasn't someone forcing them. It's no sports like telling us, hey guys, please be friends, like be friendly with one another. This will be the holistic approach we're going to go for. There's none of that, and even if there was, would have not accepted that to begin with.
By the way, on that topic, let's just keep it going, mate. I like to just go where the conversation goes. That's one topic where this is what's funny, right? Because of the way I also do know how drama works. So I know how to sort of package up some ideas to make like more people look at them than they would if you just made it like if you made it like a fucking scientific paper. Like, here's my white paper on this topic. Like, no one's going to read that shit. So one of the things people will know is one of the most famous people I've had sort of a contentious relationship with is Weldon. Obviously, the guy who first came into League of Legends, particularly with the sports psychology angle, right? And what people don't get, and they've never gotten, is I am not against the concept of sports psychology. In fact, I myself used to recommend for years to Device and the players who are now in Astralis, who are now the best team ever in CSGO, that this is the number one thing they should invest in, because they had all these amazing players and they were always on the brink of winning, but they would always break down. And the thing is, right, if you told them, look, what you're doing is actually called choking, like you're actually having some sort of like mental problem in the game, they would just go, no, I'm not, like it's just I had a bad game and it can happen to anyone, and plus I'm young. Like, they had every excuse, right? And I will say, fair play to them. Later, when they acknowledged this, they embraced it and they were able to become champions. It sort of like was that missing piece. But that's the key thing. It can be a missing piece, right? But even then, depends on the player. Like, it very much depends what your personality is like. And the other thing is, it's definitely not like a panacea. It doesn't just heal everything. So one area where you're talking about here that I actually think it can do damage in League of Legends teams, from my experience, is I would want the sports psychology person to like address the team before a big game, get people's mind frame in the right space. Or maybe a specific player's having issues. He goes to them, he talks to them. I wouldn't, as I've seen in some teams, want that person to, like I'm saying there, make it like we're in kindergarten, and then they're going to be like, right, now you sit here and you're going to tell him what you like about him, and then you're going to politely tell him what you don't like. Listen, for some people, maybe that'll work. I could maybe see like a young team that might work. There's certain players, though, that will probably actually get you nowhere, I think, if you did that approach.
We had the exact example, I guess, next year when we were a veteran team. We came out of Worlds and suddenly we're the sports psychologist, because we thought that the only thing we needed was actually like someone that was like keeping our mental together, instead of like having anyone actually like coaching us, because we had the Duck for a time who was basically like head analyst plus head coach, like, so he was doing a lot of good analyst work. And then we had Mountain Hermit, and we had Aranate to a certain extent. So there was some coaching going on, but it was not like they weren't the main driving force behind our team. So we thought we could get away from them and like maybe reinstall ourselves with the sports psych. And what happened is actually quite the opposite. When that sports psych tried to basically like almost regulate like our conversations, our behavior patterns, it actually had the opposite effect, because suddenly the drive was not intrinsic anymore. It's like kind of forced. It's more like, yeah, be nice and be nice to one another. But that's not what we knew. We didn't know that. We didn't know being nice to one another. We didn't think of it as efficient. Like the way that Germans and Danish people are communicating, and like I guess Mithy was pretty German, to be fair too. Like the way that he acted is like really direct. We don't like to sugarcoat anything. So what we say is what we mean, and we don't want to like try to like, I don't know. Just change up the words in order to make someone else feel better, because it doesn't make sense to us to do that. It's not how we grew up. So all the conversations we had in Origin were really, really blunt. They were really face up, like me and Mithy especially. Like there were times when we basically like told one another, you're stupid, like whatever it is, or like worse for that, and made sure that we knew one another like did something wrong, but we also made sure that we could fix those issues. And that sports psych, when we had him there for a short time, it was actually doing the opposite, because suddenly those discussions were not authentic anymore. They were not there. They were guided, and they were thus unproductive for us. So I think sports psychs in general, like, and I think that's why I think you're like disagreeing with when to a certain extent comes from, is that sports psychs have their place in esports, and they definitely do. Like in a lot of situations, like they can help certain players, they can help the teams that are choking all the time, like they can help them get to a high level. But I don't think that a sports psych can basically become the head coach of a League of Legends team, which is something that I guess Weldon is doing, because at that time you're basically taking away too much time from the actual gameplay discussions and the holistic approach which most sports psychs have, instead of this almost like Phil Jackson, like kind of incite some anger between the players, like make something happen, is not happening, because like they're by the book. And in a lot of ways, like that by the book play doesn't work for esports players because it's a complete different book they should have read in the first place. So there was one example I had him with Fabian Broich, which was my Schalke sports psych.
Okay.
He took his moments, but he was saying the right things at the right time, and he was actually inside, like he's promoting like heated discussions at certain times because he knew you had to burn once. We had basically called it, I think, storming, and then you call it I don't remember the other ones, but it's basically like you storm first, which is basically like the whole anger coming out, and suddenly like you basically pull yourself together, you fuse better basically, and at some point you're basically like a closer team, right? Because when you go through these emotional like issues and emotional like exchanges, suddenly you know the other person better, whether they like it or not. It's kind of like going to war, I guess, where it's like almost like a band of brothers, where you go through the thick of it and suddenly come out stronger. And I think that's what a lot of sports hikes kind of like neglect.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I mean, obviously, what builds up the camaraderie if we're in war, etc., is the idea like we're risking our lives for each other. So as a result, even if I don't know, like I'm not from where that guy's from, or maybe if we were at home, we wouldn't be together. Obviously, in that moment, it's going to make you stronger. I'd even use the analogy of like if you want to get big muscles. If people don't know, spoiler, you have to tear the other muscles so that they can regrow bigger. You don't just like gently do it really tiny amount like that. The point is, that would actually eventually get you big, but the problem is it would take forever to do it. And that's actually, I think, what you were nailing here is the problem the sports psych has is if we're just living life, certain times we need to have conversations where we're very polite, etc. And just because we're just trying to get along. If you're trying to win a championship, you're trying to win that championship on that day, and you've got to get whatever it needs done to win that championship, which is actually, this ties back into The Last Dance. Because one of the things people aren't going to be able to handle about this show, it's funny that Michael Jordan, when he made this, like I know you've probably heard that anecdote that supposedly he commissioned this show. He had the footage for years. He commissioned the show when LeBron James won that championship in Cleveland because he knew people are going to start in the media saying LeBron's the GOAT. So this guy, by the way, is on such another level. He was like, even though I'm retired, here's how I sort of go one-on-one with LeBron to get the GOAT status to me, right? And if you saw the recent surveys, he's won. Like all the young people now are like, no, Michael Jordan definitely the GOAT. So what's funny is though, this just shows how Michael Jordan's in a different like mind space than the rest of us. Because even though he cut a lot of things out of the documentary that might have made him look bad, like he sometimes put some things in there to address them that you had to. But what's funny is I bet he watched this and thought, I come off brilliant in this. But actually there's times where, especially the modern generation, is going to be, like, for example, I'm thinking of that discussion he has in like the last episode with Scott Burrell, where they're in the playoffs for like the last championship. And he's just telling him, half jokingly, but with sort of like a menace behind his voice. Like, if I ever meet you after this, I'll just whip your ass. If we're in a bar, I'll just have a bar brawl. Like, when he's saying that, if anyone leaked that any LCS player said something like that in a green room, that'd be the end of the world. So I'm definitely not promoting that. But my point is, in that scenario, like what he was trying to do there was, that was the guy who to him contributed the least and wasn't taking it seriously. And he knows, this is my last chance to ever win, mate. And I want to be the best and win as many times as I can. So listen, basically he's telling him in that scenario, like, get on board and get the fuck out the way. Like, I can't tolerate like messing around. Like, this is my career. And that's like, as you're saying here, you have to, sometimes the problem has to be resolved now.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. And I, like, throughout my career, I had a lot of these moments where I was like, almost, where I didn't have the sense of urgency from other players, for example, by comparison, that I felt like, especially like in Schalke, I had to kind of push it to begin with, because I think a lot of people, like, they weren't slacking, but they were really disappointed by the last split. And then I came in and I basically like try to push that urgency. And it's like, for example, I knew at the time, like too, when I was with Schalke, that this was probably going to be my last stint where I'm actually going to make it like far. The team was great. Like, I knew the players, I knew all of them, and like I could kind of identify with them, and the coaching staff was there too. So like for me, for example, in this case, I had to push that urgency because I knew there was no way that I was ever going to make it to the final again because I'm washed up as fuck, and I had to push something. I had to push something. So every single day was like pushing for like the agenda, pushing forward that we're making sure that we get the most out of practice. So we're fixing every single mistake. And that like these things, like a lot of players nowadays don't really identify anymore. They think of esports as like a long-term job. They don't think of it as championship like aspirations, where back in the days, I'd say season 4, season 5, like winning a championship effectively meant that you almost like get half of your salary on top of like basically the year, So it's basically like a financial incentive to win. there was a huge financial incentive. In season 3, like to go even way back, like winning a tournament basically meant that you get like 3-4 times as much as your monthly salary.
By the way, just because people won't know the figures back then, it's because if you won the split, you got, I think it was $40,000 or something. Yeah. And at the time, like you're saying, people didn't make much in Europe. Like the salaries back in Europe, I'm guessing people probably, like you're saying, a top player probably made like 100,000, 200,000 max, maybe.
Wait, I think probably less. Like there was like, I mean, at least from what I can tell, like the top players like in season 4, season 5 made like 1 or 2K, 3K maybe on top of the LCS salary. And the LCS salary is public, so people knew at the time too. So it's like basically maybe 80K. I think it's like basically the top earner, maybe 90K. And then with season 6, obviously with Noah Winston like driving it all up, it was a bit different, but. Yeah, like the financial incentive was insane. Like you win summer split, you go to Worlds, suddenly you make like 20K, 30K, like, and that's actually insane amount of money, especially for someone that was in that age. And nowadays, like the players get a lot more money. They have a lot less financial incentive to actually win because the comparison like between salary and actually winning a championship is like completely different. Plus, it doesn't mean as much anymore. So winning a championship now doesn't necessarily guarantee you a spot in the next year's roster. It doesn't guarantee you anything anymore. So the financial incentive actually comes more with like trying to be the best brand that you can be and someone that is like basically building as much network as you can do. Yes. So that is like the complete counter incentive to like what you, for example, see in the 90s or 2000s in the NBA too, where winning a championship meant everything. If you win a championship, that means you have championship pedigree. That means you're going to be on a roster like next year. You had this until 2014, maybe in 2016, where like, I mean, I guess 2014 was like kind of the last year where I actually saw it, where people like Ray Allen like were still hired for that, you know, like, and like, you had basically people like from old championship rosters being put on other teams. And that didn't really happen afterwards anymore. It didn't really like cycle through that much anymore, as far as I remember, because Golden State Warriors teams didn't have heavy like old champions on the roster. No. So that kind of changed too, and like that whole change also like came over to League of Legends too, where like you saw Hjarnan and Buddy, they made it to 4th place awards, 3rd, 4th place, they win, and suddenly they were benched. I mean, it was probably the right thing to do because obviously G2 became better. But they didn't even find a roster, which is the craziest part about that. So, and then, like, for example, me, I was in the same boat. I would get 2nd place with Schalke. Suddenly, I didn't find myself on a roster next year. So, like, there were a lot of players at the same time that were basically dropped. And I think that gave other people more of an incentive to build up a network, make sure that they're well liked, make sure that they are, like, well positioned in the community, like, amongst the other players. And championships don't matter anymore. Like, it's not a financial incentive anymore. It's not a safety incentive anymore. So where's the incentive? There's none. It's just intrinsic drive. And a lot of people don't have that. Because, quite frankly, that's something like only the top 0.1% maybe have. Like, basically the Michael Jordans of League of Legends or the Michael Jordans in general.
Yeah, actually, to bring it back again to the topic of like a locker room dynamics and stuff, which again plays a heavy role in this show. Like you see in this show, particularly as it's obviously Michael Jordan, is like a driver of his teammates. But actually, the interesting thing to me was in that sense how him and Phil Jackson teamed up. Because if you notice, there is never any mention in the whole show of Phil Jackson and Michael Jordan ever having a fallout or having a dispute. So that tells me, by the way, that I think they must have had conversations, but it was kind of like, right, I see you're doing things this way, I'm going to cover this other angle, or, you know, we're going to be on the same page on this message to get it across to them. Because if people don't know, it's crazy that Phil Jackson's won the most championships. And so people might naively think, especially because he gives that like Zen master persona, people might think, oh, he's a really chill guy. It definitely isn't. Like one thing people wouldn't know is this guy, in a positive sense, is a master manipulator. The key thing is, if you're the guy who he sees is driven, and if anything, you need to be sort of contained a bit, like Dennis Rodman, he'll never shout at you. He'll just let you go, and he'll like work with you and stuff. But I tell you what, if you're some of the players, like I know from when he was in the Lakers teams, he used to go ham on Pau Gasol, because the famous thing about Pau Gasol was he was a guy who could sort of like just chill, and he didn't have the killer edge in the same way, you know. So he was trying to like bring that out of him, and he was almost trying to make it like, I'm going to challenge you to show me you can do it. And if you do it, You have to do it on the court. Obviously, you have to like show a certain type of a game. You have to rebound more. You have to get the offensive rebound over someone like Kevin Garnett, you know. So a classic example, by the way, is if people don't know, Phil Jackson was one of the main people who used to stir the Kobe and Shaq beef in those early Lakers teams. As in, he would just tell media guys things that like they didn't like about each other. And then when the beef would happen, if people don't get it, that's like a perfect example of like locker room dynamic that looks so toxic, but probably is why they won the championships. Because what's mad is he convinced two of the best players in the league to basically battle each other to win the championship. So it's almost like if you're in a league game, if it's like, instead of tilting when the other guy talks shit, if I'm like, right, you know what, we're going to win this game, but I'm going to win the game in a way that shows that like I was really good at the game, and then this guy's going to have to acknowledge me. It's almost like that. Like it actually had a positive result in the end. So what I thought I'd bring it round to is this. When people think about that dynamic of being someone who drives or is blunt and confronts people, the funny thing is, in this particular OG team you were in, that wasn't Expeke, even though he's considered the leader, he's like the spiritual leader of the team, and obviously he's the greatest player, arguably, to play in that lineup. But the funny thing is, that's because Expeke isn't actually like the fiery Spaniard that you think of all the Spanish people, you know. Mithy's way more along those lines. Like, Expeke actually is just one of the most chill guys ever. It's part of the reason I know why people wanted to play with him, because he's wicked in the game, he wins, and then he's just a cool guy afterwards. But Mithy, if you don't know him, like, it's almost perfect that he actually comes from the Canary Islands. He was stuck on 120 ping, and he used to play a no-name game called Bloodline Champions, right? Because if you know his background, you know what, like, you'd have never heard of this guy if he was a chill guy. He had to be a nutter, basically. He had to be a guy who's super driven and doesn't let anything hold him back. And if you think of some of the teams he was in the past before you, especially that NIP team he was in the year before, this guy's been in the absolute, like, that's like, it's not Elo hell because he had amazing players, but that's like being trapped in a scenario where you can't get your dreams. They couldn't even get into LCS. Then he got banned for a while. Like, this is a guy where back then careers were short. He thought his time was running out. So I've no doubt he was like super motivated. When he got the talent in your team, I bet he was super motivated to whip you guys into shape and get people playing the way you want to play.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely was. Like, even like when we're just in Tenerife and everyone could kind of like chill a bit more because we had our morning coffee at like 10 a.m. and we went out the door. Suddenly it was sunlight in front of us. There was like, I mean, we had a swimming pool and everything like that. Like, I've never seen someone like in that position, like especially from the support position, be that driven in terms of like trying to improve the team. It's more like his position is so limited, and especially at the time was really limited in terms of what he could do. And I guess it may still be limited, but so what he had to do is basically make everyone else better in order for his support role to basically function. So if his teammates function better, if they're walking better, like doing rotations more cleanly, his role suddenly becomes more impactful because then he can be in the right spots more often. So every single practice, like after every single practice, we made sure that we knew, or like all of us knew what we did wrong. And there was like an infamous that I remember, especially from Worlds 2015, like when Peke died twice in mid lane. Like, it was not even a scrim, it was actually an official game against Flash Wars. He died twice in mid lane. We're like, and he's just like, Peke, did you not know where they were coming from? We just pinged you like 25 times. How'd you die? And like this kind of like slight toxicity, which you would call toxicity now, but at the time it's just normal comment, because like everyone is wondering and someone is bringing it up. It's like something that drives people forward, because then they suddenly realize, hey, I actually have to set my shit up. I just have to do it. And there has
takes balls to say that to Expeke as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that like you had to have a certain kind of audacity, and I think at least me and Mithy had that. I guess maybe it is a bit delusional, maybe it is just the eccentric kind of like play style or something like that, but it's really driving the team forward, where we considered most possibilities and made sure that our teammates understood that we considered most possibilities and how they can learn out of these possibilities. So like these things like that we thought that we knew better than our teammates made us drive the team forward, because that's just like because that's basically like that almost like ego that we had at the time made us believe that we knew more, and thus we could push the team forward, and we had to teach other people. So, and it actually did drive the team forward, because in the end, like, people didn't know any better than we did, and we just tried to like push, and we kept increasing our knowledge. So I think that whole ego, that almost like delusion that we had, really just effectively carried the team to a certain extent, you know, because like obviously Pekka and Source had their things, and they did a lot of things for the team, but I think without Mithy's drive, especially, I think that team would have like maybe ended up third behind HK, maybe fourth. You know, we never know. Maybe we would have not won the Rocket Series, and we would have not gone to Worlds. So there's so many things that could have happened if that drive wasn't there. And I think especially Mithy, like someone that people don't quite understand how great he actually was as a player.
Oh, it was amazing.
It's like this guy went to the finals like basically every single split he played, besides the split that he got like the last split that
Yes.
that they struggled with Origin. So
Yes.
that alone is a huge feat, and people don't quite understand how locker room presence, at least from him, not even his individual play, because his individual play was like bad in the last 2
Sure.
years. You know, it's like or meh, I guess. That like he carried the locker room in a way that
He's like the most valuable player, arguably.
Yeah, I mean, probably, yeah. Him or Sven definitely like were the most valuable players, especially towards Worlds, I guess. You know, during the regular season may have been different, but like the drive between the two, like just incited so much fire between other people. So people
Put it this way, I know people are going to overreact when I say this because I'm purposely picking like a name that's a very big name, but I'm not joking. From knowing Mithy over the years, especially through the different phases of his career, I consider him like the Western Matter. Like that's the sort of impact I consider him as a player. Like every team he is in will not only be better, they will play his style and they will be better for doing it. And you basically have to also kind of live and die by their style.
Yeah, if you don't live by his style, you're gonna die by his.
Of course, yeah. I've got an analogy that no one's going to believe I'm going to say, but that's the thing. I always surprise you. So I'll tell you a figure that I'm going to now compare to Michael Jordan favourably. This is going to blow people's minds. Reginald from TSM. Because everyone's going to laugh like, haha, what are you talking about? Reginald never won Worlds, Sarah. Right, calm down. Reginald had NA players and an NA team. Like, guess what? Nobody's winning Worlds, Sarah. Pick the NA team that you like and they've never made finals. So we can ignore that part. That's stupid. If you look domestically, here's a guy who totally understood the concept of like, things are going bad towards the playoffs. People have to level up and be more serious. I've got to whip people into shape. I've got to win this championship today. I've got to do it now. It doesn't matter that this player wants to play a different way or he's trying to develop his game. You haven't managed it so far, mate. So today you have to do X and Y that I know you can do, and that's what's going to let us succeed in the game. It's why I always say, as much as you can definitely look at the downsides of it, perhaps that's part of why they have outdated ideas about jungling, etc., weird concepts about shot calling. There's clear upsides where, because this guy was a winner himself, if people don't know, in his region, he won many championships himself before LCS even began. So I've always respected that aspect because that's like an imprint that comes from him on the team culture. That, like, you can speak to this. If you know Bjergsen as a person, that ain't Bjergsen at all. Maybe some of it rubbed off him now, and he's gotten some of that in his DNA. But like, Bjergsen was a really shy guy. He was a get along sort of guy. He was the kid who'd quietly carry the game. So to me, I'm sure you say he influenced you here. Reggie has some of that sort of winner mentality in himself, right?
It's the winner mentality and just the fact that he knows how to force people to do what he wants to do to things. That it wasn't even the financial incentive behind being like basically a player for TSM that basically drove other people in the team to basically follow him. It was the way that he worked. Like, people don't understand how hard this guy worked and made sure that everyone knew that he worked that hard, and he could back it up with knowledge every single time. So like there was times that, especially Worlds from season 4, when Loco was kind of taking the backseat more or less, and Reggie was like the driving force, I guess, behind the coaching staff. This guy legitimately slept 3-4 hours, and he worked on both scrims, then obviously on the organizational side of TSM, but also on VODs. He kept looking through every single Korean VOD he could find. He watched every replay that we acquired because of us playing like the scrims. And he watched through them all night. He just kept watching them, and I was like, at some point that has to stop. Like, this guy needs some sleep, but he didn't care. The only thing he cared about is like making sure that we win and win the best possible shape. So everything that he did was basically to drive the TSM, the team, not even TSM, I guess, but the team forward. So people, yeah, and I think that Michael Jordan is the best, best reference for him, because there's no one ever. And I think I can make that claim, actually, because I've seen him worked harder than Reggie did during his time, even as a coach. And if there's if Darius' stories and everything like that was any indication, he was quite like just the same as a player. Like, the way he worked, the way he imprinted on other people, the way he made sure that everyone understood that what he wanted is what he was getting, because he had the knowledge to back it up. And I think people they just don't understand that. At that time, this was revolutionary, and it's still revolutionary. It didn't change. Like, 6 years later, people work less probably than, like, even less now than they did back in the days. So Reggie would even shine more by comparison if he worked now than did before. So it's actually insane what he did in terms of work ethic, in terms of like making sure that, like, especially like, I guess he had a huge input on me, where he completely changed my playstyle from being more of a defensive jungler, more of like a flashy player that tried to make some plays once in a while, like to a highly early game player where I took everything from him that he told me, like level 3 ganking, making sure that I have the pressure coming up and that my laners can play freely. So he basically formed me in a way that I think no one else did in my entire career, and I think that's something like, I mean, for a narrow-minded person like me, it speaks a lot of value.
I mean, what I would say is, listen, generally, like in the modern day, obviously there's been players who had success outside the team because they've had double lift, etc., who's won a lot of championships. But I would just say this, the way you know that this works is just like if you look at the careers of Michael Jordan and Kobe, who kind of inherited some of this mentality, the teammates who play with them, who would tell you, oh, they were harsh or they were brutal, they don't have success outside those teams. Like, they don't go and win 5 championships with someone else. That just doesn't happen. So what's funny is those people themselves end up looking back fondly on that period, even if it was brutal at the time. And I'll tell you what, here's the part in the show that everyone should go watch if they want to see exactly this reference. I think it's maybe in like episode 4 or 5 or something. There's a part where they address the fact, oh no, it was later, it's in the Steve Kerr episode. It's the one where they address where he basically, like, again, Michael Jordan was stepping over lines no League of Legends player would be allowed to. He straight up punched the guy in the face because that's how heated it got. But what the point he makes when he's sort of addressing this drive he had, this relentless drive to get the best out of everyone, he says a line that was so telling because it fits what you're saying about Reggie here. The reason they have to respect it, the reason they have to listen and try and implement it, even if they disagree, is because you can say what he said, where he says, like, I didn't ever ask anything of anyone else that I didn't do myself. And then he explains that he did more than everyone else. That when they just came to practice and he went hard on them, he'd already done weightlifting and 2 hours practice himself before that. So if they come on the court and they see him drenched in sweat, they see he's got his like weightlifting gloves there, he's done his weight, like, how can they then not go hard? Or how can they say, oh, come on, man, like, it's just practice. Like, he just like Reginald, he can say, like, I've done it all, man, now you have to.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you have some championship pedigree behind you. Like at that time when 95, 96, 97, 98, I guess, like the way that Michael Jordan was able to influence other people was like even more so than he was in his earlier years, because suddenly he had like the championship pedigree. He knew what he had lost when he basically went to baseball, and suddenly like the whole incentive was completely different. I think for Reggie, when he lost being a player, I guess he kind of knew that his time was up. I think it was kind of a similar transformation where suddenly realized, hey, I really, really have to do a lot more now than I even had to do as a player. Or like maybe it was the same amount, but I feel like the way that it influenced other people and the way it influenced 5 people at the same time was basically inhuman to a certain extent. But none of us actually regret being under his guidance, because what he did for us is something that a lot of people don't understand. That like making us ready for playoffs, making us ready for Worlds. We didn't see Worlds or playoffs as like a pressure situation anymore. We didn't think about that anymore. Like scrims were so stressful, scrims were so intense that like any game in playoffs was basically also a breeze. It was fun by comparison, and that is an insane feat, and that is something that drives any kind of stage fright out of you right there.
Now, there's another side to Michael Jordan, though, which definitely they captured in this show. But the problem is, if people get too traumatized by like all the negative stuff, they're going to ignore this part, which is you can't only have that component to you. Otherwise, like, yeah, that will turn people off. So a funny thing that I think people sometimes missed in that show was part of the reason why Michael Jordan was so insanely popular in marketing is he has a ridiculous charisma. Like he has that that definition of magnetic charisma. Like you see it when he because that's one of the interesting things about demanding people is because they're so demanding of everyone, and you see them like that. If they turn on the charm and they're nice to you and they like you, the value of that feels insane. So it feels like the sun shining on you on a warm day. It just warms you, and you want that feeling. Like you saw it on this show, like it was like that. So like, what would you say to that angle? Because I feel like to me that's where Expeke is a bit like Michael Jordan. Like Expeke has that like aspect to him where like it's just, if everyone else talking, it's just good to be around him. He's just a cool guy to play with. Like he makes you feel like you've joined a winner's team and now we're going to win.
Expect definitely had that quality where in a lot of ways whenever there were certain things that had to be addressed, like he was really timid about it. He was almost like scared to kind of tell us, but one of the certain things that basically were positive, like when we went out, when we had like Travis and everything like that, he always lightened the mood. When there were issues between the team members, at some point he stepped in, he was like, hey guys, let's take a step back, let's try to revisit it later time, like something like that. So anytime he was like, he felt like there was too much tension, it was almost overflowing, he was kind of the balancing force who made it like almost like enjoyable to play, and then it made the stress feel a lot less than it was, because obviously when you're a self-coached team to a certain extent, that stress is all on you. There's no one else that's going to back you up. There's no one else that's going to take responsibility. If you fail, you fail. It's your fault. So like all of us obviously felt the pressure to a certain extent, but Pekka was always there to kind of like equalize that. And then his charisma allowed us to not have to care about the non-gameplay stuff anymore, because he took that whole pressure off of us. We didn't have to be a marketing factor. We just had to take some pictures once in a while, tweet a bit of bull crap on Twitter, like flame some Thorin, flame some Monte Cristo,
of course.
that kind of stuff. And that's the only thing we had to do. And no, but he took so much pressure off of us that again, like it's. I mean, I don't want to keep saying like this is something people can't imagine, but within that concept of the team, it allowed us to flourish, because we didn't have to worry about one thing of the game anymore, which a lot of players nowadays, I guess, have to worry about. It's the branding, it's the like showing themselves off more or less on social media, that he just took away from us. He was the face of the franchise, even if he wasn't the driving force within the team, I guess. He was the driving force behind the team in terms of like making sure that our social media presence is adequate, that our face outside of the game is adequate, and that like the mood is somewhat lighter, and we can actually relax once in a while and make sure that we can step back from the game, step away from the game once in a while.
Now, one other part about this Michael Jordan persona that you would get to experience in this show is basically my actual favourite part about Michael Jordan, because he was never my favourite like basketball player. I appreciate great players, of course, but to me, you always attach yourself often to like people's personality. And one of the things I loved about him was there are so many, like basically, if you ever want like the definition of an alpha male, like you could write a whole book, someone should, of just stories of Michael Jordan beefing with people and then literally going out in a game and doing like something that like means he wins the beef essentially. So in this show you saw like, you know, he takes like George Karl doesn't talk to him in a restaurant, so because of that he decides like he has to destroy the Supersonics. Like the best one is when they tell the story of in the 93, I remember this one, where they played the back-to-back games against the Washington Bullets, and there's this player called LeBradford Smith. And what happens in reality, right, this is the real story, is that guy just had a really good game and he was a role player and he got lucky. So when they played them, because coincidentally they were playing them the next night, right, Michael Jordan then scores 36 points. That guy had 37 in the whole game, 36 just in the first half. Now here's the crazy part, and this is the most mad part about this, is as they say in the show there, the actual story in the media was what Michael Jordan told them. He told them, after the game, the guy came up to me and he sort of trashed me, just said like, nice game, Mike. And so I said to everyone, you know what, I'll have as many points as he did in the whole game in the first half. And then he almost did it. He was 1 point off, right? But what's funny is later on, as it was admitted by some of the like talking heads, it never happened. Michael Jordan did it because this was just a couple of regular season games. The Bullets weren't even ever a top team. Like, what he was doing was finding, right? Obviously, I'd be motivated if this was Game 7 in the playoffs, if this was the finals. But how do I motivate myself on like a meaningless back-to-back where we'd probably win anyway? Like, that angle of like, because how I would tie it to the modern day is, to me, I actually see some of that in how G2 banters with people. And by the way, you could even tie it to when you guys were on TSM and you had your battles with us and with CLG, etc. Like, what you got to do here is you got to find some extra way, another reason aside from just winning in the game to motivate yourself in that scenario. Like, because here's the difference. When G2 does it, they make fun of themselves even sometimes, but then they have to live up to not doing that because they know they're going to have to meme themselves and look stupid and say the draft was bad and they can't, and, you know, Mickey X should only play supports that don't even, I need hands, or Yaka Shublisajwani, you know, these are the best players memeing themselves. But meanwhile, you go in the same era and look at Fnatic, right? You've probably noticed this. Fnatic's social media tries to be like, haha, we can meme as well. And it always backfires because they have the players who can't handle that dude. Like, they have the players where if you meme and it doesn't work, they hate that. They don't want to read their replies. So what do you think about this? Because like I said, there's a couple of teams you could allude this to, like this idea of, you got to get an edge. You got to channel basically whatever could be negative in the reason to win the game, to prove that fucker wrong. Hey, look, Thorin, we did win the LCS split when you said we'd be whatever 5th to 6th. I think I said you would be.
Especially when you're like, if you're a team that has been together for a long time, or if you're a team that, I mean, veteran team, like similar to G2 right now, like let's say you play Schalke 04, like you're thinking about that game, you're already like. It's a 90% win, like 99% win. We just have to show up and we're probably going to win. Like, how do you motivate yourself? Like, you have to find something exterior. And I think the way that they're doing is actually like something I wouldn't personally do. I may have done in the past, but I wouldn't do anymore. It's just putting themselves out there. We're going to trash you. We're going to make sure that you know we're going to trash you.
Sure.
And like, he can't do nothing about it. And in case it goes badly, then it's a good social media story. So these kind of things, like just finding exterior motives, like to basically motivate yourself, is something that a lot of people like really neglect. And I think they don't think about it as much because the season is long and tedious. Even though it's just 18 games now, for example, it's 11 weeks for us. 18 games over an 11-week span kind of like gets you, like, especially after like 24 scrims, 25 scrims a week, suddenly like you start off with this motivation, you go down a bit, and then like at the end of the season, rack it up again, right? Because at the end of the season, you have the playoffs coming up, the playoff seedings. But like, what are you going to do in the middle of it? So there has to be something that comes from you, it comes from social media, it comes from somewhere that isn't intrinsic to you, because you can't quite motivate yourself every single day just by your own, like, I guess almost like discipline to motivate yourself to a certain extent. That it's like you have to find something exterior. Like Michael Jordan, like the way he did it and the way he does it, like making up stories, is obviously a bit of psychopathy to a certain extent. I don't want to diagnose anything, but I think I haven't figured out. But like even social media stories, like I remember in the TSM days, like the whole, obviously with you guys, like I remember, and I still remember.
We were the secret coaches of TSM, mate.
Yes, you were. I still remember this. There was one episode where Monte said these words, and I made sure that he will forget, like he will not forget, is that Amazing is just a 9th to 10th place jungler. Like he's not doing anything in the early game. He's not even ganking. He's just farming. And like that whole quote is stuck in my mind. That like even 6 years later now I remember it, because I used it as motivation at the time, and made sure that like this is not something you can say about me at the end of the season. There's no way I'm going to be a 9th to 10th place jungler in the LCS, in the inferior in LCS at the time. That like I'm not going to let this sit well. It doesn't sit well with me. So, and there's so many times when I heard was like just raging about like certain people on Twitter.
Oh, of course.
Like, this guy is saying bullshit again. Like what is going on? Why is he doing that? You know, and he suddenly like just goes on a tear where he spams a ton of solo queue, plays like 5 to 10 games more than
people wouldn't get it, but like this is the funny thing about Soaz, right? Americans hate him because they just see him as like the archetypal French whiner who's just complaining like, hey, everything is not how I want it to be. But what they don't get is, look, every time people fuck with him and tell him he's done and he's washed up and he's tilted, that is when he always does so well. It's like it's almost like the joke is you want someone to just say, make a thread like, Soaz is such a tilter who's never, like, he's so washed, because that's when he comes back straight fire. I'm with you on that one, yeah. It's almost like essential to his personality.
Yeah, but I think like, I mean, so people don't quite understand Soaz. Like in general, I don't think he actually plays for fun anymore. He doesn't play because he wants to. He plays because he's. I mean, how to put this mildly without like sounding insulting or anything like that. It's like kind of like a cockroach who keeps being beaten down. But he's so resentful about anything that like the other people are doing, like other people are saying about him, that because of that he's getting out the skewers again. You know, he's making sure that people know that he still exists. So every time people push him down, they beat on him. They make sure that he knows that they think that he's shit. He's making sure that they realize that it's not happening. Like I'm just here to make you guys look bad, and that's the only reason why he still plays. I feel, at least.
Now, one thing that we could relate this to if we move to another topic is, so we mentioned Phil Jackson before, right? One thing that I think is so misunderstood about Phil Jackson is, and I'll tie this to grabs, because it's the point I made quite recently when I made like a solo video about grabs, where if you watch it right, listen, I'm not saying in the video like he invented anything in League of Legends, like some unique way to play the game, or he's come up with all these genius comps no one else did. The main point I drive to is because it's what used to happen to Phil Jackson. Phil Jackson now is obviously revered because he's just been in the game so long, but especially after he'd only coached the Bulls, people used to just say, well, we had Michael Jordan, didn't he? So, yeah, anyone would win if they had Michael Jordan, right? That was the logic. They thought, well, Michael Jordan's so driven, he'd find a way to win anyway. So, you know, they think that's coaching on easy mode. Yep. I would hope watching this documentary, they know that's coaching on hard mode, but a different kind of hard. That's not where you're trying to get a guy who's a rookie and you're trying to figure out, like, how do I teach him the game? Like, look, this is how you run a pick and roll or something. It's the other side. It's you have superstars who think they know the game, but you have to fit them together. And so that's why I draw the analogy to grabs, because the thing about grabs is, again, one of the secrets grabs has in his toolkit is he knows when to seem like he's sitting back being the Zen Master saying nothing and let them figure it out themselves, or when to just slightly prod a guy with some banter and tell Jankos, you know, who obviously, what I love is he has this relationship with Jankos where they pretend that they're like, I can't believe I'm going to say this out loud, but they have that like anime tsundere relationship where they're sort of like, oh, I hate you, senpai. Like, what are you doing? But it's like secretly these dudes love each other, especially the success they're having together, by the way. They know that they need each other. So what's brilliant is, like, again, he knows when to just get out of the way and let people figure some out, but he also knows when to prod a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, he's way different to other coaches, and I think it's actually a real talent to know when not to overcoach. I think a lot of coaches nowadays, like, they feel like they have this textbook where, like, oh, I have to do this and this, like, oh, we have to teach this in this rotation right now, otherwise I don't get it on with my coaching book, and then at some point I won't be able to finish with my team. And it's like him stepping away and actually like understanding that his role within the team is not to be like the guy that intervenes 24/7, not to be the guy that basically like forces the team to do certain things, not to be the guy that like makes other people like change who they are, is something that like is so undervalued because it doesn't show up in the statue. It doesn't show up in the fancy like coach of the split awards because people don't talk about it as much because his coaching is like not that obvious, I guess,
Yes.
But it shows up where like making that step back and allowing the other players to basically flourish and just letting them do whatever they want to a certain extent until you have to basically enact to a certain extent is like it does so much good for the players, and it's actually something that I guess almost like we would have liked to have in Origin if I think about it correctly, because we just needed someone that was preparing our drafts, like did something for us in that kind of regard. The Duck did it to a certain extent until they went a bit like too far, and then like that's just it, like not a bona fide analyst, but someone that is like a good person, generally a good person, and is able to drive the team forward by simply not doing too much at certain times, so just providing them with a niche like information that they need in order to basically drive their own knowledge forward. Like you basically put fuel into the engine. That's how I would see Grabs right now, like honestly.
Yeah, and I'll give an analogy. When you say like overcoaching, I see a lot of that in the modern day, especially because all these coaches keep getting told that they do nothing and that they're rubbish by fans, right? So they think like, right, I have to apply myself even more. And a lot of them have never coached before. So they're almost just thinking of stuff they've seen in movies or what they think Koma does in like career or something. So like, it's amazing. If anyone who's been in green rooms or behind the scenes at LCS knows this story, where you have these coaches who've only coached a short time and they're literally running through like the most basic things that these players know, almost as though it was like a kid going out the door and it's the mum like, right, remember your jumper, and at school don't let the kids like nick your school lunch, like, but stuff that like that's not appropriate for a top team sometimes, whereas in this case like Grabs definitely doesn't do that. And in fact, the analogy I'd draw between Grabs and Phil Jackson here is, you see it in this documentary, a thing that Phil Jackson is legendary for is when it's like the crunch time moment, there's 2 minutes left and we're down by 3 points and we're taking a timeout, he isn't the guy who's like, right, everyone shut up, listen, here's the play, here's the X's and O's, what you're going to do, you're going to defend this guy. Like, he sometimes would even do the opposite. He would be like, let's let these guys figure it out. Like, challenge you. Like, do you want to go out this way? Do you want your season to end this way? Or are you going to do something? Or are you going to figure it out? And if famously in the game, he's one of the only coaches ever, which is crazy that he's the most successful, who doesn't take the time out to cool off the other guy scoring like 4 buckets in a row. That is the most famous thing, by the way, in coaching. That sometimes is whack. Sometimes it works, but like like every coach does it. It's very, very famous. If the guy hits 3 threes in a row, you take a time out, so he has to think about it a bit, walk to the you try and cool him off. Phil Jackson's approach is like, I'm not taking a time out. Why are you looking at me? You better figure out how to stop that guy.
Yeah, and it's like he actually forces the players to go through that emotional trauma of being scored upon like 3-4 possessions in a row by the same player, Like imagine a Kobe being scorched by, let's say, Gilbert Arenas like 4 or 5 possessions in a row.
Sure.
Like someone like Kobe, someone like MJ, like even role players will probably not forget that this guy scorched them like for that many possessions in a row. And I think that emotional trauma is actually almost like what he wants to inflict upon his players, for them to basically figure out for themselves, hey, how the hell do I get out of the situation, and how do I deal with like just honestly being humiliated on national television. So I think that in itself is such a valuable asset. And I think that like and just in general, like I think this emotional, I don't want to call it trauma because I guess it's like negatively.
Sounds too harsh, yeah.
Yeah, but it's like emotional.
It's more like learning through like discomfort.
Yeah, it's like emotional discomfort, I guess, where like that emotional discomfort is almost like something that people have to go through in order to basically like become stronger. And that's something that I think Phil Jackson excels at. And he's also he's no stranger to just letting things go, which is basically like just allowing Michael Jordan, for example, in certain situations to take the enemy's best player instead of like, and I'm saying enemies, like opposite teams, best players, like instead of like having Scottie Pippen do it for that position. It's something that they figure out for themselves because he understands the value of the team knowing one another the best. Because the coach obviously has an insight, right? Because he's coaching, he's seeing them more, probably every day. I don't know how it is in the NBA, but I think you probably like every day, every second day. I think the team always knows one another better than the actual coach knows the players. Like it's just like he may have an outside perspective on it, and he may have his own evaluation, so he knows how to pick and put certain people in certain positions. But the players themselves know whom to trust in which situations, how to figure things out in certain situations. And he banks upon that fact that the teams themselves become strong enough for them to figure things out by themselves in the end. And that is so much more valuable in crunch situations. It's so much more valuable in pressure situations than me just telling, for example, like in my case, for example, telling the players, this is what you have to do, this is what you have to do right now, this and this and this. Instead of the players just being like, hey, we're self-sufficient, we know what to do. The only thing you need to do is like providing me with the overall information that we need in order to become the best players we can be.
And I'll give you, just to tie it to grabs again to finish that analogy, the one area I would compare it to, this is a bit more tenuous, I might be crowbarring a bit here, but I'll make the analogy anyway, is, right, listen, I definitely give a lot of the credit for how G2 plays to Perks. Like, I know he's a very vocal captain. And actually, one of the things I think is unfair about that team in terms of the people they have is they have so many players that themselves was a star player on a different team that the way that they can all work together and work like a hive mind at times is unfair. Like, other teams just don't have the players with that initiative and stuff. So, but similarly, in the same way as Phil Jackson let the team figure it out themselves, didn't have to give them direct instruction. G2's biggest strength, I think everyone's identified it by now we've seen all the betters, is these guys inside of a game that's happening can adapt and find openings without anyone telling them. Like, no one told them, at 13 minutes, we're going to have had these 3 skirmishes and this moment will happen and you'll turn the fight back around. Like, but you can't plan for that. You can't coach that. That's something where you have to almost, like, it has to just be allowed to exist, like, organically or something. It's such a unique, like, I can't think of any team in League of Legends that has that strength right now. A lot of teams have, if they have a good draft or they have the right team comp, they can win the game. G2, I mean, you've seen it in some of the games they lose. Sometimes they lose a game, but it takes 15 minutes longer because they just find ways back in the game.
G2 really reminds me of, honestly, the old teams that we used to have, like CLG EU, like we had Moscow 5, we had, like, then obviously, like, the Season 5 teams of Origin, Fnatic, like, they remind me of those teams because what happens nowadays, and I think that's like kind of the opposite of G2's approach, is that like the coaches take more agency, and that's what we discussed earlier already, and that actually it brings instability to the team because you rely on an exterior voice that is not going to be present in the games, and you rely on him to basically make the shot calling for you happen, right, or the decision making for you happen. So even if the coach may know everything, and I'm not even claiming, for example, that I know everything, that like even if the coach knows everything, the players cannot use that knowledge within the game. They cannot like use that skirmish knowledge. They cannot use that, hey, how do we make this rotation a bit better within this certain moment? Like, because the situations change maybe you have the basis, right? Like, everyone has the basis and the coach is able to teach the basis. So people know like how to approach rotations and like how to approach certain team fights. But the certain in the moment decision making is perfectly just like something that has to be synergized between the players or within the instincts of the players. And that hive mind that they have to create is something only the players themselves can sustain. The coach can help to a certain extent with doing that, but the players themselves have to basically have that intrinsic mind to actually like force that hive mind to come together. And G2, just like the old teams, like back when we didn't have coaches, is doing that. So that makes them so much stronger than any team that has a strong outside voice as a coach, in my opinion.
I'll give you one other person I'd like to compare to Phil Jackson when I was thinking about this. And in similar fashion, a mixture of coaching stars, but also another side to Phil Jackson people might not know, is I'll compare him to Youngbuck, former coach of G2, Fnatic, now obviously with XL. Like, here's another thing people wouldn't understand about Phil Jackson is because he let the stars to some degree not be coached when he knew it was the right move. Like, he knows this guy's like driven, this guy's too wild, this guy wants to prove himself. Like, he lets them not be coached. And then what he does is he coaches the role players really heavily. And if you ever look at Youngbuck teams, listen, people know that Mithy and Perks weren't really being super coached by Youngbuck. They know that, like, if you have like Caps and Reckless, they're probably doing their own thing. You know, it's just the way it is. But I tell you what, the players you need to fit around those guys, Youngbuck, like Phil Jackson, has that quality where it's like he has a way of like connecting with those players and figuring out like a way where it's like, listen, you're not going to be the star player. So I've got to sort of convince you here to do what I want you to do and what the team wants you to do. But the most effective way to do that is if I convince you that it's really what you want to do, because you're going to be in the best team if you do this. Like if you help this guy who seems really fiery and super driven, if you help this guy who's the best player, you're going to win championships too. Like we're going to win this way. This is how you do it. Because if anyone knows the stories behind those Fnatic teams, especially that Young Buck was in, this guy's a miracle worker. Like I don't know if he's got the talent in Excel to make it work. It's not really like the offer I would have liked to him to take it out. Actually would have liked him to be in a TSM or something. But just look at his track record with totally different sets of players. It's amazing what he can do with these players. And every time in these teams, again, I'll use the same analogy, right? Go back and look at those old teams where they had Trick as their jungler who was winning MVPs, right? What has he been like since he was in a Young Buck team? Non-existent. Go look at Expect. People make fun of Expect now. He used to be like an underrated player back then because he used to just do his fucking job. He really was like a Dyrus. He was like, right, I'm the weak side top lane player. I'm never going to get any resources, but I know that. And somehow they just convince me to do it and I do my job. And that's why the rest of the map can carry. Like you look in Fnatic. Some of the band-aids he did in that team after Caps left, where he was making, like, dude, he would get Bwipo, a guy who wants to be like a carry push top laner, to run to the bot lane to gank for Reckless. Like, the guy's a genius. Like, I used to tell him, like, I don't know how you're figuring this stuff out, mate. Like, one day, I told him one day, years from now, when you're allowed to, we have to do, like, either an interview or a documentary or something, mate, because there must be some amazing stories.
I mean, they definitely are. I know some of them. Like, you know, it's definitely.
He used to be a teammate of yours, of course, as well, back in the day.
Yeah. I think his play time, like his time as a player, actually made him more incentivized to coach underdogs, like basically role players that are not necessarily going to carry every single game, but they're really important to the team's chemistry. And in League of Legends, you only have 5 players. You cannot really go through more. You know, you cannot just be like, oh, I'm going to sub in like 5 other players, you know, once in a while when I don't like my star player. So you actually have to make sure that the weakest link is strong enough to basically withstand the pressure that withstand basically any kind of pressure that the star player is going to put upon you. And I think in Youngbuck's case, especially, he made a lot of people more mentally resilient. He made them more specific. Like he found so many ways to actually make them effective, which is something that especially role players don't quite know what to do. Like they don't quite know how to make themselves effective. Otherwise, there would be star players, right? So they elevates the level to a certain extent, until the point that they actually compete with the star players. So someone like Bwipo, who was coming out of nowhere, honestly, he was utilized really, really well. They saw his strengths, they understood that this is what he wants to do, and then they just taught him the macro, the basically the game itself, you know. So that's what Youngbuck did for him. Then for Trick, like for I think for Expect, most of them for Trick, because Trick was an established strong in Korea, but like for Expect, for Kickers, for Perks even at the time, maybe when he started out, like he got him to a decent level, like to the point where they can actually hold their own and then find the place within the team. And I think that's something that is really, really hard, especially with the egos, I guess, even like role players have nowadays. And I'm talking from experience, actually, like from working like now, like in 6 years or 7 years in the LEC and the SES, that like at this point in time, like the ego level is a lot higher, I guess, on average in the LEC. So you have to make sure that these egos are being elevated or like being put down or put in perspective to the star players, and they have to make sure that they can actually align with the star players. And I think that's what he did for Bwipo. That's what he did for even like he at some point Breakers became a supportive cast to the team, and he still did it for him. So when he didn't know the meta, he didn't understand the game, he actually made sure that he understood the game at some point again. And it fortified him in that position. So like he elevated the worst members of the team to basically almost become the team strength, which is incredible.
Because actually, I mean, they didn't show it as much in this particular show. I guess maybe they showed it a little bit when they were showing like the record-breaking season. But one thing I remember so fondly about that era of the Bulls is all the role players, and especially the bench players, most of the bench players never did anything in the NBA except for these teams they were on. Like they were nobodies, like Randy Brown or like Judd. But like these weren't even like potentially good players. Like they were just okay pieces. Well, here's one of the crazy things that made that Bulls team so dominant. When they would basically have the time where you have to have a time in the game where you rest the starters, like a couple of them, or you rest one of them, this and you put another guy in. Normally, you're supposed to sort of just like if that's like end of the third quarter and you're resting a guy for the fourth, what you do then is the mission in the NBA is you just survive. Like you're going to probably lose in that part of the quarter because the other team's going to score, and then you're going to basically try and come back stronger later and like, right, I've got my strength back. Those teams were infamous for putting in the bench players, and because they had these guys so motivated, they'd just blow teams out. Like they would just keep like banging on them completely. Like Steve Kerr would just hit like 3-3-pointers or something, and they'd be like, oh, well, actually, we just win the game. Fuck it. Like that's how you know a coach has had impact for my money.
Yeah, I mean, he made them buy into team system, which is something that like not a lot of coaches can basically say for themselves, because that team system was not just Michael Jordan. It was actually that the worst player on the team still mattered. Like, so anyone that is even like the Scott Burrell, who was like, he wasn't terrible, but he averaged like 6 points a game maybe on the Bulls teams, you know? Sure. So he wasn't quite up there. He had his moments. Steve Kerr, who was like, he admitted himself he's not the greatest player in the world, obviously, but he has a competitive mindset. So Phil Jackson harnessed it and made sure that, hey, we're going to use this guy in certain scenarios. We had the same like with Ron Harper, who was a star player, I guess, before that, but he still like bought into the Bulls system. And it's like that system was so much more than just just Michael Jordan. It was actually that the worst player in the team could still out hustle the best player on other teams potentially.
Now, obviously, one of the names we're going to talk about is going to be Scottie Pippen, because if you're a fan of the Bulls, one of the best of all time. And crucially for me, one thing I love about Scottie Pippen is I feel like there's so many fun ways we could probably go with the analogies for this one, because the thing that people don't know, I mean, they kind of show it in this where they show the storyline that when Pippen was in like college or whatever, he started as the equipment manager and then went to star player and went to the NBA and became a champion. So this is like the ultimate underdog. I think he even comes from something mental, like a family with like 17 kids and like, you know, some like outrageous poverty scenario. So the thing about him is, because he's with Michael Jordan, the ultimate winner, people think of him that way, like the championships. To me, he's like the ultimate underdog story. And also he's someone where what I love about his personality is, on the one hand, his personality with Michael Jordan pushed him to bring like the championship element out of him. Like, you know, he's more of a chill guy himself. But the funny thing is, the dynamic of the two of them is just, it's beautiful, because on the one hand, Michael Jordan's way of driving you, some people that'll react to, but some people will just be like, he's hurting my feelings. Like, actually, you know, I'm going to react badly to this. Like, it's not working. And so because Scottie Pippen himself knows what it's like to be the guy who would be a bit more chill, he's the guy who puts his arm around your shoulder. He's the guy who's like, listen, man, you know what he means by that. Like, he just wants you to rebound more. You know, he does actually think you're good. But like, he's the ultimate good cop to the bad cop of Michael Jordan in that sense. So can you give me, who are you thinking of in the league in general, or your career? Who would be a good Scottie Pippen in that regard? Who's just like a brilliant teammate in that sense to make you feel good?
I was thinking of Björksen, but I don't think he actually made anyone like feel better. But I think maybe Darius was the one that was like the Scottie Pippen, because he went through the wear and tear of being under Reggie's guidance even as a player, so he knew kind of like what to expect and how like certain things like panned out. And when he was basically part of the team and like still part of the team next year, and Reggie moved into the coaching staff, I think Darius moved in that position where he was almost like the, I guess like the 93, 94 Pippen, where he was like, more like, you know, trying to lead his team to a certain extent, like emotionally to a certain extent, and make sure that everyone kind of understood, hey, this is what we're doing, this is the system we're playing in, but I'm going to make sure that you understand that this is not like, it's not as harsh as you made it out to be and what it is. And then like basically transitions throughout the season when Reggie became more intense to a player that was like, hey, so if you need anything, like just let me know. Make sure that you don't take what Reggie says like too little, like don't take it too hard, you know. So he actually became like had a position in the team where he was more or less the emotional leader, in a way that he was like the other piece to Reggie's almost like just pushing nature, where he also kept pushing the team. It was also balanced to me and Björksen, where we picked up some from Reggie, and then Darius was basically the guy that was like, yeah, like making sure that this doesn't come to us or it doesn't get to us too much, and we actually have a bit of balance in our lives. And I think his like laid back nature actually made me understand that, like, well, there's also another side to esports. I guess there's also another side to just playing 24/7, and actually allowed me to kind of settle down once in a while and make sure that I don't burn myself out. And I think he would probably be the closest thing that I can imagine to Scottie Pippen, at least from an emotion standpoint.
Yeah, if we listen, we'll ignore the in-game part of this, because we're making the point about like what they essentially did as a teammate, right? If we're going as a teammate, based on stories I've heard, I might relate Perks to him in that sense, because like to me it makes perfect sense that Perks and Mickey Perks and Mithy had so much success together. Because again, if I see like the driving force is Mithy, but Perks is another one of those people where this guy, even though we joke about like all the poaching and stuff that he does on Skype, etc., the joke is he doesn't even have to do that. People just want to play with Perks because first of all, you know you're going to win, and then secondly, where's the stories about him being a toxic teammate? Where's anyone? Find me one person ever who played with him and said, "Oh, I didn't enjoy it." Like people love this guy. Like there's something about him. It's very amazing. This is why I relate him to Pippin a little bit because he's always been one of the stars in his teams. Usually the stars come with the asshole mentality. That's just kind of comes with the territory. So the idea you could be as much of a winner as Perks has been, but then also be like the coolest teammate who somehow just like, it's got that, like we say, it's like the emotional captain.
Yeah. I mean, we could compare it to him, but I think he'd probably be more of a candidate. I mean, I'm trying to find a better example of him actually like being more like Scotty, but I think that emotional like resilience that he has and making sure that everyone else on the team is actually feeling fine is something that like is reflective of Scotty Pippen's mentality. And I think the way that people like, besides the whole Skype thing, like like you don't quite know if you're going to be on the team next year if you find another
exactly.
teammate.
That's true. Thing. If he's duoing with someone, watch out. I'm just saying, just watch out.
So if someone else is better than you, maybe you got next year. But other than that, like
true. That's not really Pippin-esque, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, actually, he may. Yeah, Scotty had his interesting.
Well, okay. How about this? How about this? You know what? Even though you said that, like, obviously in terms of being an emotional leader, Bjergsen isn't like Pippin. I tell you what, this will shock people because unfortunately, once a narrative's set in people's minds, it's stuck forever. So I'll give you the best example ever. Ask anyone who Faker is and tell him that Faker's just won the last few championships in a row. They're going to go, oh, Faker's this hard carry mid player who like outplays you and he plays assassins. It's like, dude, that's someone you're talking about who played 6 years ago. Like Faker the last few years is a guy where he'll just play mid lane the way it's meant to be played. Like he'll just play a mage when he should and he'll play Lulu and he'll play Karma when he needs to. And you know what? If this game Khan's going to carry or if this game Klid's carrying or if this game Teddy's got the right pick, guess what? It's their time to shine. I'll let them carry me. I'll be the good teammate. So I'll give the analogy because I know you're one of the people who actually knows about this, where it's never really properly come out. Because everyone remembers Bjergsen as the hard carry Syndra player or the guy who'd go on Zed and he'd fuck up even Samsung White, they forget that one of the things I've heard is the best qualities about Bjergsen is in these latter days where he's been more of a mage player and especially he will sometimes give up a pick in draft. He'll take the not that good pick in draft, even supportive ones, famously Zillion, etc., to make other people better. That's Pippin-esque because the thing about Pippin is, as you saw in that 94 team, he could have been one of the like all-star players in the NBA on his own and made lots of money. He could have been on like a team that, is a playoff team but doesn't win. What he instead was willing to do was to play with Michael Jordan. I'll let Michael Jordan be the star all the time. Like when Doublelift joined TSM, I feel like that's the switch Bjergsen made. He was like, you know what, I used to be the carry, but you know what, I know Doublelift wants to carry and I know he's hungry to win. So screw it. Let's just let this, like, if we need to in some of these games, every now and then I'll take a backseat. I'll give him what he needs. Like, it sounds like listen, we can sometimes debate if he does it too much, but he's a very a sacrificing, unselfish star, right?
Yeah, no, he is. And when I played with him too, I think the dynamic with the two of us had, like, because throughout my career and I guess throughout his career, we've both been emotional leaders on our teams. And like the dynamic was almost like big brother's little brother. So like I'm 2 years, like almost like 2 years older than him, and I didn't have that much life experience at the time, but it still showed in the way that I approached like.
Still, I'm older than him.
Like there's still like certain things that were like really like telling in the way that we behave towards one another. Like we always made sure that one another's fine, but it was more like he was the one that was basically creating like the environment for us to be in. Now it's more like the guy was bit off the road once in a while. It's like like take some turns there, take some turns there, and he just kept like stringing me back into the right lane. I think
grounding force. Yeah,
it was a grounding force, and I think the way that he behaved and has now evolved too as a person and a player, because I think I did talk to him recently, just like to pick his brain about like certain coaching things and like how he should approach like certain players in his team, how I should approach certain players in my team, especially now with the copy change, like when that like after that was down, so that whole thing was like something like how like we talked to one another, and it's like the evolution as a person that he has shown is like basically becoming this emotional force as a teammate, becoming the supportive kind of person that makes sure that everyone in his team is catered to, that everyone in his team understands like what has to happen. So like there's so many things that like he evolved to, and I think he has become really comparable to Scottie Pippen. But he just needs that Michael Jordan again. He just needs that Michael Jordan, and I'm not sure what it's gonna be for him, because I think at this point in his career, Doublelift is not a Michael Jordan anymore. I think he's he kind of regressed. So he have a lot of supportive teammates, but yeah, I would love to see him be united with another Michael Jordan. Like whether it's going to be like another crazy ass jungler who's coming out of Europe and like tearing up the NA solo queue, whatever it is, or like someone else on the team who can take that responsibility, right? So he needs someone that is just taking the weight off of him, because while you can keep people in the right lane all the time, you're never gonna win like a championship with just being in the right lane. You have to make something extraordinary happen, and it has to be beyond like what is like the standard.
That reminds me, actually, I forgot to mention this earlier when we were talking about the part with Michael Jordan and taking grievances. A player who does that famously is Doublelift. Because here's what's funny. I'll just tell everyone who's watching this show, like right now in the summer split of 2020, that's what Doublelift's trying to do when he does all these interviews now when he just joined TSM again. He's not really talking to you, the fans. He's talking to himself. Like when he keeps saying all that weird stuff, because he keeps saying about how like he's going to destroy Team Liquid and they should regret letting him go. It's like, dude, you wanted to go and they let you go. Like, if anything, there shouldn't be any beef there. But he knows, because he's played for so long, and he knows that he gets bored of the game, and he knows that just winning's the only interesting thing. So the way he motivates himself, he looks for these little areas where, again, he can start some beef. He can challenge it, like famously, if Sven's down and he's on TSM, it's like, right, I'll challenge this guy. I'll try and make it seem like he has to battle me, Like, he's definitely a guy where, that's why I say I feel like he's doing it for himself as much as anyone else. He's trying to get himself in the game,
What was the last piece that he did? He was talking to I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was like him being back at TSM puts him in the same mindset that he was in like basically a couple of years back, right? Like when he was on TSM, he had to be that emotional force. He had to be almost that, I don't want to say psychopath because obviously that's overused, but like someone that is basically like slightly off the hinge and make sure that like everyone in the team understands that like we're driving towards something that is more than just like mediocrity. We're striving towards something that's like going to be the best in the league. And right now, after TL, I think he had to awaken it again. And it makes sense because that last split like was horrendous. He got benched for tactical, which is beyond me anyway. But that whole thing like just makes him re-incentivized like to basically become the best player again. And the way that he talks to the media, that he talks to his own, like, is basically reflective of someone that is basically just trying to almost like sort out his inner demons right now.
Right, let's just do it.
Do we have a Steve Kerr? Do we have a Steve Kerr? Who's a Steve Kerr?
Oh, that's a tough one. Let's do that then, okay. Because the thing with Steve Kerr, if people don't know as well, is it's funny that him and Ron Harper were on that team, because actually both of them, when they came in the NBA, were better players than they were on these Bulls teams. These were people who are, like, this is how I'm going to set it up. These are people who, to be on a championship team, are willing to accept the lesser role, but knowing it wins you the championship. Because just like Ron Harper, if people don't know, was like an all-star, Steve Kerr was a guy where, if he'd have been on another team, you'd use him as like your main shooter. You'd give him like 5-6 shots a game. In the Bulls, he probably got, I'm going to guess he got like 3 or 4 or something, and only in specific moments, because obviously their main offense is give the ball to Michael Jordan, let him go one-on-one. Like, they're not setting it up and kicking it back out to Steve Kerr all the time. So to me, that's the mentality I'm looking for. I'm looking for the guy who sacrifices and says, like, I'll be willing to do maybe this aspect of the game to win a championship. So I feel like it's got to be someone who's like, it's got to be someone like a weak side top laner or some sort of like a jungler who could just like works with this one specific team well. Is anyone coming to mind when we're saying that?
I mean, I think Svenska and me, I think we fit that persona kind of to a certain extent. I mean, Svenska less so than me, I guess, because like he had a bit more success. But I think the way that we approached like the game, especially in the later stages of our career, has become more team centric. Like we were mechanical, like I don't want to say gods, but we're really mechanically skilled.
They're really strong, yeah.
And then we took in lesser roles who basically win championships or try to win championships. And maybe now like both of us couldn't carry a team anymore, especially me as a coach right now. But it still allows us to basically flourish in conditions where like he has strong laners around him. Xmithy is another good example, I guess. So where he's able to take that step back and make sure that everyone else in the team is better. Even like someone like Broxah could be seen in that way, because like he's kind of similar. But it's like all these players that used to be mechanical like players, like base players, that suddenly became more or less a team force. Fit that Ron Harper, Scottie Pippen, not Scottie Pippen, but the Ron Harper, Steve Kerr type really
yes.
well.
Because here's the thing, again, unfortunately, this is where most modern fans, you have to remember, most fans always came in a year or two ago, so they're not going to know early Svenskeren at all. So you're already going to know the Svenskeren on maybe TSM, but mainly when he's on Cloud9 and now, obviously, when he's over on EG. And that Svenskeren is way more of like control jungler, play around the players. Like, obviously, he's brilliant when he's on, like, if he's on a Sejuani type pick, you know, that's when he's at Gragas. That's the type of champions I want the guy on. He's going to be amazing. If you know what a change that is from early Svenskeren. Early Svenskeren's like all mechanics. Early Svenskeren's the guy who doesn't ward because he's too busy trying to duel the other jungler.
No brain, all brawl. There was no thought behind what he did besides like, oh, I want to kill the enemy jungler. Yeah.
And he could do it. Yeah, that's the thing. He had the skills to do it. But that's why I say this is how you know this guy went through a big evolution as a player. Because he went from that, essentially the guy where, like, for example, when he was on SK, I basically heard from behind the scenes that, like, N-Rated used to basically just pilot him. Would just be telling him what to, like, he would just be looking at the map, like, right, go here, like, check that, like, right, if he's not there, then there must be someone there. Like, he was the guy reading the game like that. Nowadays, Svenskeren's the guy doing that in these teams. Like, there's a reason he was the MVP last year when he was in Cloud9. Like, he's one of the guys who's controlling these elements and letting his teammates know where he can do these things. So I feel like to take on that responsibility, that's part of why you don't make it anymore about, like, it's just mechanics, I'm going to try and smash the other jungler. It's like, that's almost like a young man's selfish way of playing the jungle at times, you know?
Yeah, and I wish that whole playstyle was more incentivized. I guess like I was kind of driven away from it after after the whole Schalke thing, you know, when I suddenly got benched after a year. But it's like I wish that was just more like popular amongst players. But everyone just thinks that mechanical gods are the way to go.
Yes.
Like winning the 1v1 matchup is the best thing to do. Like you can skirmish all the time. Like let's be real here, and I keep saying this. Like I've said this in multiple instances. How often do you actually like skirmish? How often does this happen? That's a 30-second interaction, like maybe thrice a game. You have 3-4 skirmishes where you have like a 30-second interaction. So that's 2 minutes, maybe 4 minutes a game if it comes up to it, you know. So like the rest of the game is being played on a really, really different level. It's all about positioning. It's all about putting your chess pieces in the right way, and it's not quite different to how like plays work in the NBA either, right? Like you have a focal point to a certain extent, you have rotational tools, you set certain picks, which is basically getting prior on certain lanes, then walk into enemy jungle, like and like these kind of things, like where you basically make rotational plays 24/7. That has to be something that people know, and if they're not capable of knowing, all their mechanics are going to waste because they have to keep brute forcing plays. So all in all, that means like players like Svenskeren, they had to evolve, they had to become better in order to become a championship contender. And they made that transition willingly, and they made that with knowingly that it would hurt their mechanical prospects.
Yeah, right. All right, let's do it then. At some point, I wanted to do this one because it's a fun one, which is Dennis Rodman. So first of all, like, if I talk a little bit about the Last Dance element, which is to set up who he was as a player, like, this is one where, again, I think it's going to be more like, if you notice in most of these players, we're not trying to make an awkward thing like this one guy's like them in every way because they're all such unique players. But, like, there's many ways you can go. You can go with the game aspect, you can go with the teammate, you can go with the personality. So one of the crazy things about Dennis Rodman is people get that he has this like very flamboyant personality and he's just like the ultimate unique character. He's just himself. Like he's not copying anyone who does that. He's just like, in fact, if anything, people now have copied his shtick. Like, you know, everyone always says famously that Allen Iverson's the one who brought like all the hip hop culture into NBA, etc. Yeah, he did. But I tell you what, Dennis Rodman was the first like individual like that. This was the guy where it's like people don't know it. Back when he was dyeing his hair, dude, there's no like famous people just dye their hair like that, like just dye it red one day. Like that's like a thing people on Instagram might do now, to just be quirky. But like he just came up with that himself. Like, that's just who he was. He was like, right, that's who I am today. I'm just going with this fucked up green hairstyle now, even if that doesn't make sense. So then as a player, one of the coolest things about the documentary is that they give this guy his due. They properly show when he was coming to the Pistons team. Because when he goes to that Pistons team, he didn't have any of the personality like that. He was just like a shy guy who, when they managed to give him that like family environment, was an unbelievably good player. Like, if people don't know, back then he even had some offense. Like later he became this like, you know, rebounder only. But like the key thing to me about him as a player is this is a player where in their own way they dominate the game. It's just that there isn't any of the traditional ways to dominate the game. Like, even if you're a rebounder back then, usually you're like a center, you're like a power forward, like you score as well. You get the ball off the rebound, you go up and you try and score it. I always thought the most genius thing about this Bulls team here, you get the sense of it when they talk about it, is, right, if I have the guy who's the best offensive rebounder, and then I also have Michael Jordan, all I'm doing is giving Michael Jordan free shots from his misses. That's like the most OP strategy you could come up with if he's the best player. It seems obvious when you look back now, but it wasn't at the time. Like that's just how they figured it out. So what are we thinking of with Rodman? So many ways you can go on this one. It's a tough one though, I will say.
I mean, from outside of the game, I would say Peke comes close. I think the way that Peke approached like life, I guess, was a bit different to some other people.
He's definitely a weird guy, right? People have seen the photos. Like, listen, that wasn't some social media guy telling me to do those weird photos and poses. He's just a quirky ass guy, isn't he?
No, that's just him. Like him being half naked in the tub, like making sure that this is a commercial or what it is. Was just him, you know. It was just him. And I think, like, there's so many good stories. I wish I could.
Dude, I'll give you a quick anecdote, a very quick one. When we once did an episode of Summoning Insight where Peke was the guest, right? When he was the guest at the beginning of the show, because for some bizarre reason he couldn't get like Skype to work, so we had to, which already says something like he couldn't get like the most basic tool to work, so we had to use like Google Hangouts or something. And at the time on Google Hangouts, they'd put all these fun, almost like Instagram filter type things. So while I'm setting the show up, you know, like if anyone knows at the beginning of the show, like I try to save the gold for the show, so I'm just setting up like, right, I'm setting the box up, you know, like talk for a second while I'm doing this, right, and I'm setting him and Monty's mics up, and I'm trying to be serious, you know. He's using this Instagram filter that makes a pirate face go on him with like a weird eye patch and stuff. And he's doing all like things where it's like, you know, like birthday hats with like those like going out. And I'm like, dude, like I'm trying to set the thing up like right now. It's like, and that's just him like amusing himself out. He's just a fucking weird guy, isn't he?
He's special. Like he's just one of a kind. The way that he approaches life is just like he doesn't quite care about the ramifications of like certain things, which is like, you know, if you go out like, and especially like because honestly in season 5 it was also a different world still, you know, because he came from teams that were like, you know, he came from the old scene, which is basically the old guard of EU, where you went out to the IEM, got pissed drunk, and then you played the game the next day or whatever it is. You know, so
he's definitely like Rodman in the fact that, listen, Rodman used to be legendary. You saw it in the show when they talk about how athletic he is. What people don't get is Rodman was super athletic in the game, and he was probably getting 2 hours a night sleep because he was just going to the club right after. So, like, if people don't know, listen, there's enough times past that we can say this amazing. I don't think anyone's going to be mad. Specky doesn't play anymore. Like, this is the thing I always thought was gangster. I knew the stories in NA were like, we need to be more serious like the Koreans. We've got to go to bed at 10 and we've got to practice. When Expeke and Soaz were like, you know what, this is week 3. Like, we'll get ready for the playoffs. On Friday night, these guys were the party boys. These were fuck boys before fuck boys existed, basically. Like, these guys were just wiling. And they were the champions because that's the thing. Like Rodman, they could get it together when they needed to. It was crazy, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was incredible to see. Like, I mean, I picked some of it up, not as much as. Like I couldn't quite do it that much because like I could just sacrifice my own play that much, you know, like and suddenly still turn it up because like I'm that much more, like they could actually do it. They like Pekka especially. There was so many times when I was like, how do you even do that? You know, like there were. I mean, I wish I could tell the stories, but he's such a great person that like he could go out one day, come back the next day, still be efficient in scrims, and still do something for the team, and still be in good mood. Like if I'm hungover, I'm not in a good mood. I am not there. But he was still like pushing the team forward. So nostalgically speaking, like he was basically the I'd say outside of the game Rodman. I think inside of the game in terms of like winning the game in alternative ways. I think Caps when he started out his career is pretty close to that. Where like when he started his career, like he was innovative. He was away from the norms. He played lanes completely different to how anyone played it at the time. Like the volatility with which he played, like level 2, level 3, level 4 all inning, like 24/7, just making sure that the enemy knows that he has to basically like be skill checked every single second is something that no other player did before. There were some like instances of perks doing it, but no one did it like Caps, where level 2 you suddenly have a rise in your face under your turret, and if you don't gank him, you're gonna lose the game. So I think maybe he becomes a close Rodman inside of the game. I think maybe some weird supports could fall under that, like maybe a Hylissang. I think Hylissang would be a good example.
Sure.
Where,
definitely a very unique support in that regard. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, he just plays differently to how anyone else played, and when he came to Fnatic, especially, that gave him such a different dimension to just operate on the map, because suddenly you have him in spots where you don't expect the support to be at certain times when you don't expect him to be there. And then like he set up the rest of the staff, like his carries up beautifully, because he made sure that there were plays happening on the map. And I think maybe that's like the closest thing to Rodman I can see in game stuff.
Let me just double check something a second. I just want to see what his actual height is. Right, Rodman's height. He's listed as 6'7", right? So here's just to make a point to people that it's crazy that this guy. Put it this way: if you want to go beyond Dennis Rodman, like the greatest rebounders after that is people like Wilt Chamberlain, who's like a full 7-foot guy with like one of the most insane wingspans and jumping heights, like a high jump champion. Like the idea that someone who's 6'7" in a man's game full of 7-foot centers is going up and getting the ball. I mean, he says it in this episode. Part of it is, in that quirky brain of his, he just had some sort of way of visualizing where the ball's going to go. So the whole point is he's not just jumping and out like reaching you. He's going to where the ball comes to, right? So to give a similar like analogy there, I'm trying to think of players basically. What I'll do is I'll take some of the great supports and junglers where their strength was, even if they haven't actually seen where you are on the map. They can just use like process of elimination and your pathing routes, etc. You know the guys where if you get to hear the comms, it's like they have hacks on. They're just telling you where the jungler is all the time. Like I think like classically, there's like if you want Korean examples, like Dandy was like this. In the modern day, Tarzan supposedly they say is like that. If you want a good support player, I've been told by many teammates, Yellow Star's like that. He's just telling you what's going to happen next and where they're going to be. And they say when you play with him, you even sometimes just think like, how's he doing this? Like I can see the same mini map he can. There's nothing on there. Like that's just fog of war. He's just telling me from. And then like the moment he says like, watch out, could be like level 5 gank top. Like you move back that one step, and that's when the guy's like Lee Sin kicks in or something. Like and you're like, what is this guy doing? So it's like such a different way to visualize the game, though.
Yeah, it's unique, and I think that like again, like that's something like I guess even coaching doesn't quite respect anymore. We don't think about like we think about League as such a like linear, almost like game where like you have to do this and this and this and this, but like people that kind of stand out, people that are like almost like outside of the game, have a completely different view of the game. They kind of like have their own mind about it, which actually helps other players in the team like to basically converse. So like I think Danny may not be the greatest example because he was kind of standard, but he was just really efficient at being that. But like I guess Hillesang predicting where you are 24/7, like and making sure that the support players are there. Then like I think maybe someone like Lee Hens, I guess in Korea, like who's like not a standard. He's a good example. I think in NA, I guess we had, who did we have in NA? There's some maybe someone like, actually it's hard to say. I think we don't have an NA example, but I think in EU it was definitely someone like Hillesang. It was definitely like someone like Buipo, even like who kind of like I don't know, played the game differently. And then in terms of like knowing where the enemy jungler is, I think the best one that I've seen was actually Cyanide in terms of like making sure that he counter gank 24/7. So Cyanide was like someone that could gank counter gank 24/7. He didn't actually gank it. Same for Diamond Prox actually. Diamond Prox and him were actually
of course, yes.
Yeah, maybe Diamond Prox is actually a really good example of that. Like of just knowing where the enemy jungler is at 24/7, invading him, making him look foolish before you even know how to play the game.
That's even a good analogy because, again, if people don't know, the sick thing about Diamond Prox is, like, I actually made a video where I go into this in depth, that, like, when he became a pro player, a lot of the things that made him brilliant was the fact that he wasn't a top pro and hadn't even played jungle that much. And as a result, when he basically, it's like the guy where, you find, like, crazy stories where some guy in India who never even went to school, like, someone finds them and then they teach them maths and they're, like, a maths genius, like, they solve all these theorems and stuff. Like, the whole point is because he'd never been taught, like the rest of us, to do things a certain way. The way he just approached it, luckily for us and him, was genius. Like he was just doing stuff that at the time made no sense. But the way he applied it, it's like Rodman in that sense. It makes them way more valuable than any scoreboard will ever show. Like you can't capture on those little numbers what they're adding to your team and what the opposition has to deal with.
Yeah, and they're so far like they're almost like transcendent in a way that they almost like up the level of the entire league because everyone has to kind of think about what they're doing and how they're doing certain things. So in terms of Diamond Prox, actually, what happened at the time is like because he was so unique, everyone actually had to follow suit. If they didn't follow suit, they just got murdered every single game. And I think the same applies to Rodman, where like if you don't actually follow the same kind of strategies that he does in terms of like being at the right place at the right time, you're gonna get crashed on the boards, and that's just how it is. So like it's that uniqueness of just being out there, not actually playing the game as much or playing it in a very different style and making it so superior to the actual original style is something that is like, it's amazing to see. And I think both Rodman and Diamond Prox are probably like the best examples of that.
Also, the one angle I think we also have to address as well is like the difficult nature of Rodman, because that's something that people won't get as well, right? In the show, they do they only very briefly, unfortunately, touch on like the couple of years he played with the Spurs. And if people don't know, this is an example both of coaching differences and like environment differences. Because when he was in the Pistons and he was a guy who wasn't even maybe supposed to be like in a top team, you know, and they made a coach, it's because he had Chuck Daly, right? He was a guy who was like a father figure to him, did this. When he comes later to Phil Jackson, he has to be redeemed at that point in time. But no one wants him in the NBA then. He's considered like a troublemaker. Because when he was in the Spurs team, they were a top team. They were one of the contenders. But the reason they never did anything is because, unfortunately, they were the team that was like, if you know the way the Spurs is traditionally, it's like, right, we do everything the right way and we're all like very polite. And even, in fact, the superstar then was a super Christian. So you can imagine like Rodman was like the complete contrast to that. And so what happened was they couldn't see the upside of Rodman because they just saw the downside and they were like, you can't have a guy like this in our team, get him out. So what you have to find here is we've got to find the people who, listen, this isn't going to be tough. The people whose personalities mean that on the one hand, it's what will put you off working with them. But if you can find a way to manage them or let that personality be who they are, you get all the upside. So, I mean, listen, you played with one already.
There's one example.
Forgiven?
Yeah, Forgiven. Yeah, of course. Like, old Forgiven was like, like the scrim talks, like even like him just like when was after game reviews, like we just into the game or we didn't count against himself 3. He just sits there. He just looks at the game. He looks through his own replay, and then it's like, you know, like, and we just ask him, hey, do you think we should have done anything differently? Like, do you know like what we should have done differently? He's like, you guys are professionals. You should know yourself. You know
exactly.
Like, yeah. Oh, yeah. Thanks, but him being himself and actually like being allowed to be the way that he has actually really helped him. And I think when, for example, he was like kicked from HK and then he came back with a vengeance actually in the summer split after Freeze was benched. Yes. Like it's like that whole thing kind of showed me that like him being himself like made everyone so annoyed because I talked to Polly about it. Junkers told me stories about it, so I know like that he was really difficult even at the time. And then like he still made it work, and this like his entire team hated him. Yes. Everyone didn't like, and like no one liked him, and he still made it work because his unique personality and his unique way of playing was even at that time, like I guess in season 6, still so vastly superior to most other people that actually allowed him to flourish. And I think like, I mean, you can't quite have that anymore. I guess like nowadays it's pretty hard to have that kind of personality.
Yes.
It does have more drawbacks now, especially branding wise than it had back then. But like, if there was another player like that, I would really like to coach that player at some point because I want to see what happens if I let that guy be.
Sure. Oh, by the way, another player you could put in that mold is like Dardoch. You know, if you hear any of the stories from NA, similar scenario.
Yeah, but I think Dardoch is just. I mean, no offense to him, but I think he's great in terms of like. Oh, he was great. I actually said
it's not as good now. Sure.
Yeah, he was great. But I think now he is run like if you run through every LCS team basically, and still no one likes you or even like wins with you, then it becomes an issue. Either you're not liked and you win, or you're not liked and you don't win. If you're the latter, like Jesus man, like then something's going wrong.
Oh, by the way, as well, this even fits the theme. I'll tell you right now, if you know behind the scenes what went on with that H2K team when Forgiven came back, that was the last dance. Like, they essentially literally sort of said, listen, because basically it was the management that convinced the players to let Forgiven come back because they needed someone desperately and they were in a bad spot. So they agreed under these certain terms. And believe you me, they could have fucking won Worlds and they would Forgiven was definitely not coming back to H2K. Like, they weren't going to let him. Like, as you say, some of these guys, Jankos and Prolly, on some level almost did hate this guy, but they also realised we sort of need him. Like, we've got to figure out a way to just let this guy work. But you know what? After we've needed him now, we're definitely going to switch teams next year, which they did. They switched it up, you know. That part applies.
There's no way that he's going to come back from the things that like the way that Forgiveness is just like he's so utterly destructive that like it works for like a short period of time. He's basically like he's honestly, how to put this, like it's like I'm trying to find a real world example, but he nukes a town, like it does the job, but it also like basically kills everything within its sight, you know, like so he does what he's supposed to do, but then he goes way beyond that and makes sure that everyone else in the team is like mutually destructive too, you know, like it's not just himself that destroys himself, where he's like, I'm pushing myself beyond limits, but he's making sure everyone else is pushed beyond limits to the point that they actually like feel destroyed at the end of it.
But I thought One other player we could talk about, because it's actually the guy in the documentary that they only touch on related to Michael Jordan, which is Tony Kukoc, right?
Yeah.
And the reason why this guy doesn't get his credit at all is like, listen, I love Steve Kerr. Tony Kukoc was a way more important player for the Bulls. Like, Tony Kukoc, for me, represents, like, you know, in league where there's always traditionally the three carries, but oftentimes it's usually the top lane in history. Maybe it's ADC in the modern day. There's one that has to be the tertiary carry. He can't be the primary one or even the secondary one. He has to be the guy where sometimes it's like, right, most times, mate, you're not going to be the star, but every now and then we need you to be. Like, you know, sometimes when the other guy isn't the star, we need you to step up. We need you to have a big game. But you also have to be able to sort of accept that the other, like, I'm on this team with Michael Jordan, Dennis Rodman, Scottie Pippen. Like, I'm not always going to get what I want. So, like, this is going to be a tricky one, but there's definitely people like this in league as well.
Chachi is probably the best example in terms of that. Okay. He was an unsung hero, but he did what he had to do at times. And when we had to have him have a big game, for example, in Schalke, and even in Spice afterwards, like, he showed up. I think there was a game last words even where he just carried the shit out of.
He beat FPX, dude.
Yeah, with Cho'Gath, and I guess, like, how do you expect this out of Chachi, especially on his old legs, you know? So it's something like he is probably the one that, like, took the most sacrifices to begin with, because he was actually kind of considered a star in UL, and then he became more of a role player too, like, to a certain extent, but he still had his big games, and I think maybe even so as on the Fnatic teams when, like, they needed
the more recent ones, yeah,
they, like, when he was on the recent Fnatic team, he was like, hey, so I was like, can you play this matchup? I guess it's bad, but I'm gonna play it. And then he still had a big game on it, had a lot of impact. Like, especially in the finals, if I remember in 2018, like, he was subbed in after Bwipo ran it down game one, and suddenly he was winning 3 games in a row. He was able to play the tank role, playing the supportive role, but he had big games, and he made sure that self-sacrifice was worth it, and made sure to make big plays around it, like roaming bottom level 6, roaming bottom level 7, like, these kind of things that, like, made or broke the game, actually. And I think him and Chachi would be those comparison, I think.
Because the reason I say it in the documentary, this is just like one minor like quibble I had. They only reference him in that context, like the Olympics and like the whole story with him and Pippen, right? But the reason they don't give him his due credit is because this exact year, the 98 run, right? Remember when they set up the whole story, like Indiana was the team that gave us the hardest time, and they make it sound like every other Michael Jordan story. Like, I wasn't going to let us lose Game 7. I'll tell you right now, I've pulled it up here. In Game 7, Michael Jordan shot 9 out of 25, which is 36%. Scottie Pippen shot 6 out of 18, which is 33%. Oh, sorry, 36% for Michael Jordan. So not good numbers. But what happened is Tony Kukoc, on 11 shots, made 7 of them, 63%, and scored 21 points himself, and they win by 5 points. So that's like an example of where the guy who isn't even the star is like the X factor. Like, he's the one who has a sneaky game that's just won you the whole game. And I think Soaz is a great example in those latter day ones, because in the latter day when they had, especially when they had Caps and they had Reckless, he knows, like, listen, it doesn't even make sense in this meta for me to be the carry all the time. But I tell you what, if there's a game where, I mean, the most famous examples was if he was playing like Jarvan, some of these champions that were like, nah, if you give him one of these and someone else is like, the other lanes aren't doing well, but you get through to that mid game, he's going to make some crazy play. He's going to have a game where he just drags you over the finish line.
Yeah, I mean, Kukoc had 30 points in Game 5 of the 1998 finals too, you know. So, like, so had those moments where, like, in the latter point of his career, which is exactly why people don't, like, really underestimate him, is that he was still capable of carrying, but, like, he just didn't have the same kind of role in the team anymore. He didn't have to do that. So his, like, perpetual, like, subpar performance, as people like to put out, is like, it was basically by choice to a certain extent. It was not something he I mean, he was basically forced into, but he also chose to do that to basically support his team. And that in itself is a feat that like only a character like him could support, because when it was counted upon, his ego still drove him above that finish line where he was like, okay, I have to turn up right now, my team needs me, and he actually made the difference. And I think not many players, if any, that I can think of, could do that. Maybe a Peke, if he was playing another year in the mid lane, could have done that. And maybe in the latter part of his career, he was actually kind of like the fourth carry.
A bit like that in OG sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, on the fourth carry scale, where, like, if we needed him to step up, there were some moments we did it. But overall, he was okay. He was okay, good, you know, like, but he wasn't like the primary carry by any means.
If people want a good example of what you're talking about here, where it's like people who've been the star player, some of them, listen, I'm not joking. They wouldn't say this if you asked them, but if you look at their actions tell you, I'd rather be a star player of the 6th best team than be the 3rd or 2nd star of the best team. And I'll tell you a couple of obvious examples that come to my mind immediately, because I love both these players, but it's a problem they have. It's Froggen and Nukedoc. Right? These guys, they won't let someone else carry them. They're going to win or lose based on their level. And so if they're not the best, in Nukedoc's case, he's going to be like 2nd or 3rd best. In the case of Froggen, he plays for pretty bad teams, but he plays for Czech as well. So he's going to be in a 6th, he's going to be 6th and just do a good job on an Orianna and farm up and then go, oh, well, I lost because the jungler didn't do anything. It's like, mate, at some point in time, like, you have to acknowledge you aren't the player you used to be. And maybe right now, someone else could help you. Maybe you could be a champion again.
Yeah, I mean, Froggen especially, I think he's kind of that player who fits a mold perfectly. And it's also maybe Afro mode to a certain extent. People don't quite understand that Afro, like, while he's basically a supportive kind of player, he still wants to be the primary shot caller, like the primary carry. Right. Maybe even if some of his game knowledge maybe like not there, so he still wants to have that effect. And I think like both of them don't quite understand like that. Certain times you just have to let go. You just have to let go. There's no other way to win than to actually like have other people almost teach you the game. And I think in Froggen's case is especially predominant, where he doesn't let anyone coach his game. He doesn't let anyone impact his game. So, and while he doesn't do that, it means that he will be forever stagnant. He will forever be the person he used to be or claims to think he was, basically. So, he never advances past a certain point, and that in itself, like, while he can be the star player of Dignitas team, maybe on a 9th, 10th place scale, he will never be a winner again. And the highest level he can reach is basically 6th place, maybe low playoff contender team. So, like, but it's a personal decision too. And I think I can respect if you don't want to be like a 2nd or 3rd string. But it's something that, like, I would personally, for example, not be able to defend for myself. I'd rather win than be like a star player of a bad team, because in the end, like, what I think matters is like winning. And I think for other people, branding, like income, like having that position within a team matters more to them than winning itself. And I think that's definitely true. It makes sense too. If you're late in your career, maybe it is actually the better move than to try to become a role player, even in League, especially in League of Legends, actually.
Well, here's the one area where I would defend it. Like, I agree with you. I wouldn't do it myself. Like, I would want to be the guy who was having a chance to win everything. Like, to me, that's the reason to play. But here's the one angle I'll say is like the counter to that is if you're a player like Froggen, where all your huge accomplishments, where you were like almost winning OGN and then you were like semis of Worlds and then you won LEC, that was back when, as we're saying, you made $80,000 for doing that. Like, you don't have a Lamborghini after that because you had all that success. So the problem is, to someone like him, he thinks he's had his success. So to him, it's like, right, you know what? I want to play League still. I want to be a pro, but I want to make $500,000 a year being a pro. So you know what? If that means I have to go to a bad team, but they're going to pay me most of the salary, then like in the NBA now, this is a very prevalent mentality. I'll go and be on a bad team, but I'll be the star player. Whereas I tell you what, in your career, this is the counter to that to me. As we've talked about many times before, you wouldn't have stood in Schalke, in 100 Thieves, obviously. In these teams, like, you're not going to be the star. In fact, that's not even the reason you're being brought in. It's like you're being brought in to know that, like, listen, I'm here to help them get better at the game with macro, or to help this guy carry the game. And that's the point, is that's a different mentality. But similarly, though, I bet you never made a massive contract doing that, relative to the other people in the team, right? I bet you were getting paid the minimum sometimes.
No, of course. Like, it definitely like hurt the prospects, like in terms of like salary that I can make out of it, of course. Because like not being the primary carry on the team basically means that like the whole incentive for you to come there is completely different to like basically being signed off as the main face, as the main carry, as the main like basically like just face of the franchise. So like for me, it was definitely hurting my financial prospects to become that like player, to again basically being almost like, I guess, I was typecast to a certain extent into that player role.
Yes.
Where at the end of my career, like, at least like in season 7, maybe I could have still made a difference. Maybe in season 8 still, like I could have also done a bit of difference for like lower tier teams, but people didn't want me to be in those positions because they didn't trust me to basically become that primary carry or secondary carry for the team anymore, because they thought that I was to a certain extent washed up, which may have been true, but also may have been overdone, to a certain extent. So it hurt my financial prospects and definitely hurt the amount of prospects I had at the end anyway. Like, I couldn't have chosen like many other teams. There were only limited amount of teams that wanted me to begin with. So like that whole thing, like being the primary carry, I would like to be for a bad team once to just experience it. But I did that in Mysterious Monkeys, and sure. I know how that worked out. So it was not my time anymore. And I think, at least for Froggen, it makes sense, because I also wonder how his playstyle would fit in with other players that are basically superior, I guess, to him. If
Sure.
that makes sense, because him having to drive his or just drop his ego completely and basically be like, I mean, I guess you kind of fill the gaps as a third, fourth carry.
Yes,
You can
exactly.
fill the gaps of other people. I think he couldn't do that. I think that's not his playstyle. That's not where his mind is at anyway. And I don't think he could change it within that moment either. And that's something you have to learn through years and years. And I think even for me, it was quite a struggle because in OG, in TSM, like I was not I mean, in OG more so than TSM, but in TSM I was probably the secondary carry. In OG I was like third or fourth string.
You're a pop off, yeah, sure.
But I was still like pop off game, so like I didn't quite let that ego run away from me. I still had it, and I think just later on in the career I noticed that maybe this is not the way to win. I just want to win championships. So I think that whole thing has to be something you have to go through and just decide for yourself. In Frank's case, I don't think he could even do that, nor could I, for example, fill the shoes of being the primary face of a team necessarily.
And by the way, I'll give you a good example of how I still got it in me. I can still do it. Here's how I'll trigger Amazing right at the end of the show, right? Is I'll just bring a concept up that he's going to recognize, but a fan might not get it. And I tell you what, this is where it will trigger you. All the GMs of Amazing's team here, all these teams we're talking about, 100 Thieves, Schalke, Fnatic even, these teams didn't understand that he was doing this, right? This is what will trigger you. When you would come to the team and be a stabilizing force and prop people up and fill the gaps and help people, but as a result, when you win, they're the ones who shine. The team shines. You look to a fan like, you know what, they're pretty good, but fuck, they should really upgrade jungle position. And so the problem is, the curse is what you've done, because it's invisible for your player, but it shows up in the other people's player. To the guy who's the GM, every time they're going to say, get me a mechanical jungler to replace this guy, not knowing that they're going to lose the things you did bring, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. Actually, that happens so many times, and it's actually mind-boggling to me that this actually was such an issue. But it's because it's also like, I think my particular way of existing, I mean, maybe it goes beyond like League of Legends. I think it's like, I want to be with my circle. I don't care about many other people outside of that circle. So, for example, when I join a team, I become really intrinsic to that team. Like, there's nothing I do outside of it. I don't talk to other people, like from other teams. I don't create these network connections. So, like, all that I'm doing is basically kept within that secret of the team. So, like, even if I did well, I rely on the other teammates and the GM of that very team to basically translate that to a public knowledge. Because, like, I mean, afterwards I brag about it because like I'm a cocky person after all, but it's like something within that moment I don't really talk about. So it actually forces me to rely on the team to rehire me next year or make my name look as good as possible for me to be hired by a different team next year. So that in itself is like, it's actually kind of self-destructive for League of Legends because honestly, people talk like, and if you have a bad scrim, for example, you try to figure things out. Suddenly, like Perks knows this. Suddenly, this guy knows this. You know.
Yes.
So it definitely goes around. So, yeah, it's definitely something like. I mean, even in retrospective, I'm still really mad about. But it's because like GMs and everything like that, and I mean, people like to talk about it. People like to address GMs. It's like, oh, they're the villains of the LEC, the villains of the LCS. But the thing is, they can only go based upon the knowledge of what they see with the total, right? So if, for example, a team keeps certain things secret, because, for example, Fnatic, I never know who does the shot calling. I have no idea. In Fnatic has kept everything so secret that if I were to hire a player, I have to hire him based upon what I see. Would I, for example, hire a Nemesis? Like if I was playing from the outside, potentially not. Like because this guy like seems like more like someone that is like. I mean, I guess like publicly the whiny type, but maybe in that team he's taking a backseat because the team is full stacked of carries. So what do I know? So these kind of things we can't evaluate. So it actually is kind of like, it's kind of shooting yourself in the foot, like hoping that you win a championship. But I think
championship or bust. Yeah, exactly.
It's championship or bust. So, but at least for me, I always felt like if I don't win in EU, especially after coming back from NA, I'm a failure. So I guess I'm a failure, but at least like I got to a point where I could get certain people to the finals at least and make that happen. So for me, it was a no-brainer. It's like intrinsic to my personality, but I can understand if other people are different and they rather show off their mechanics and make sure that they have a long career and make sure they earn as much money as possible. But that's up to them, you know.
Here's the ultimate irony, amazing, is that when back in the day you got mad at Someone Insight, one of the first big shows that tried to, talk about these narratives and talk about who the players are and guess who does the shot calling and who we praise and who we don't. You should have come on these shows, mate, because that's the thing. In the modern day, that's the other way that you can market yourself. You go on shows and you show how you see the game and you tell people what this teammate does or you say what's undervalued. Like, I always tell people, the people I usually recommend it to is coaches, because obviously coaches can easily get like people thinking they're rubbish or they do nothing. So I always tell them, if you come on a show, mate, and you show off the way you think about the game, people will start to understand it, and then they'll make a narrative that's you're contributing to. You get to sort of pick up the pen a little bit.
I mean, I should have, but I think there was kind of a media bend between the two of us.
That's true. That's true.
So
That's true. It was prohibited. You're right. There was something of a prohibition on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember just like Monte coaching SK, and we're in
Yes.
Korea, right? And like we walked past him, and it's just this walk of shame for both parties. Like we just stared him. He walks past us,
Just
like
say nothing.
head down,
course,
say nothing,
yeah.
walks away, make sure we don't see him. It's like there was so much. We definitely antagonized one another. But yeah, I should have done that. I think I should have started in season 5 though. I think in season 5 would have been a good time, like to just bury the hatchet. Because I did bury the hatchet with Monte actually at Worlds 2015, but I never did it with you until like we had the whole season 6 thing where like there was something like with a Worlds replays and that kind of shit. But it is what it is, and it's like I think narratively wise, I think for a lot of players, especially role players, I think this is the best way to do it, because there's no other way to control that narrative other than what comes out of like your other teammates. Otherwise, it's what it is.
Exactly. This video was kindly supported by Alexander Rao, Bobby, Dean Tanglis, Istar, JDubs, Jensen Goh, the Puyallup Tribe, Saliko, Spencer Green, Tobias Bernasconi, Zinged, and a special thanks, as always, goes out to my main man, Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Maybe you want to ask me a question in those AMAs I do each month. Do you want teasers for who's going to appear next on my content? Maybe you want to take part in one of those lengthy discussions about esports with me. Well, if so, then put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.